2022. This is the request for amendment to Chapter 21, Article 3, trees to extend tree protection and update permits. In conjunction with item 412-22, a request for review and amendments to Chapter 21, Article 3, Division 3. Both of those items deal with the tree ordinance. For those of you who have been following along, you have seen that we as a committee have been working our way through the tree ordinance based on two different proposals, and we will continue doing that tonight. Let me first say who is here. From the Programs and Services Committee, from Ward 1, we have Councilor Maria Greenberg. From Ward 2, President Susan Albright. I am Josh Krinsman, Chair of the committee from Ward 4. From Ward 5, Councilor Bill Humphrey. From Ward 6, Vice Chair of the committee, Councilor Brenda Noel. And I don't see any other committee members at the moment. We're also joined by Councilor Julian Malachy and Councilor Tariq Lucas and Councilor Allison Leary. From the city, I see the Chief Operating Officer, Jonathan Yeo. I see our Assistant Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner, Mark Welch. Do I have that right?
Sure, either way. Deputy, but it's fine.
Deputy, okay. And Jennifer Wilson from the Legal Department, correct? Great. I notice Councilors Emily Norton and Chris Markowitz have joined as well. Good evening, everybody. So if you have your agenda, your packet, on the last 2 pages of the packet, this is pages 25 and 26 of the packet, was a quick sort of overview of what we've done and what is to come. Hopefully, folks had a chance to look at that because I would like to dive right into more substance tonight. Essentially, we're looking at, as I said, we're going through the ordinance from start to finish. Each time we come to a proposed revision to the ordinance, we look at the proposal that came from Councilors Norton and Malachy. We also look at the proposal that came from Mr. Welch, and we evaluate if we're going to make a decision, if there's some other proposal, if we want to make any changes. Let me quickly say we've also been joined by Councilor Holly Ryan from Ward 8, member of the committee. So I would like to continue on with that tonight. Before I suspect, though, that someone wants to derail that. So are there any other comments before we get started that anyone wants to make? Great. Okay, so again, hopefully people had a chance to review where we're at. Where we left off, if folks have the document, that was a 22-page document that sort of goes through the ordinance and shows the 2 different proposals. We left off at the bottom of page 10 of the 22, and we were talking about notice for tree removal, who should be notified. Is the bottom? Yeah, and we had a proposal from the councilors that all residents within 500 feet be notified. We had a proposal from the city that did not want to amend the notification provisions at all. We did not have a clear majority, but we also didn't have a full complement of the committee. So do we want to start with that decision? Do we want to revisit that decision? Again, the choices were sort of to leave it as is. We could notify just direct abutting properties, or we could make no change. So as is was the councilor proposal. Again, that was all neighbors within 500 feet of the lot, just abutting properties, directly abutting properties, or make no change to the ordinance. President Albright?
I just procedural. I have my copy as part of the 10/19/22 version of the it was our agenda that night. Could you just tell me the number that the number we're at, because my pages aren't organized?
Where in the ordinance?
Yeah.
It is.
What section?
Section 21-83.
Okay.
Subsection C.
Very much.
Councilor Humphrey?
Yes, to answer your question, I would like to revisit that sort of hung vote that we had.
Okay, my recollection is that last time you wanted to provide some sort of notice, but not 500 feet.
Right, I think that was the proposal for just the abutters, which is partly a practical matter for implementation, to make it a manageable, contained thing, and also to limit any sort of issues around appeals and harms and
Yep.
things like that to people who are actually abutters. Plus, as I argued last time, I think there's a lot of trees that can probably be saved just by sort of a neighborly conversation. That's not necessarily going to be true in every particular case, but
Yep.
it's probably going to be true in a lot of cases. Or if there's an actual genuine, reason why it needs to get removed, then that will come up in that conversation, and then maybe there will be less hard feelings about it. So as a practical matter and utility, I think this is the way I'd like to see us go with this.
Councillor Noel?
Thank you. So what is the role of the abutter if I'm taking down a tree, my neighbor has to be notified and my neighbor doesn't want the tree taken down, then what?
Mr. Welch, do you want to speak to that at all?
Sure. So as under the current ordinance as it's currently written, and even really both proposals, if someone is aggrieved by a decision that I make in the process, they have the right to appeal. So we think that, obviously if more there's broad notifications, the number of appeals and input that we receive is going to be pretty significant.
Councillor Norton or Malachy, do you want to speak to the motivation behind proposing that all residents within 500 feet be notified?
I'm on mute, off mute, so I'll jump in. Yes, basically the area that could be impacted by, we can have some very significant losses of tree canopy. And we were following the standard abutter definition. I think the effects are many. It's, loss of tree canopy, contributing to the heat island effect, more noise, less buffering from, could be vehicle exhaust or whatever. And really the people who are direct abutters can be affected by, loss of privacy, the effect of greater erosion, especially if they're, downhill from a bunch of trees. And right now, as Mark mentioned, there is the right to appeal. This did come up. It was used, for example, with some benefit over behind the Whole Foods where, massive amounts of trees were being cut down there. And because they knew about it, they knew they could appeal. But in most situations, if somebody applies for a tree permit, Mark issues a permit, and nobody knows about it until, the trees start coming down. So a right to have input, and if you feel you're going to be harmed by the loss of trees, doesn't mean much if you never get to exercise it because the decision is made before the 5-day window of appeal. And there's also the question of abutters' own trees potentially being damaged. And, I've seen recent examples of this where, people have giant oak trees, they're near the property line, and when construction work is going on, they're going to be, their own trees are going to be damaged. And often, even if there's not construction going on, when a tree company comes in to cut down the trees for a developer, say, they often don't really know where the property line is necessarily. They might start cutting trees that aren't even on the property they're working for, or they might just be instructed to, lop off these branches of the neighbor's trees while you're there because they're in the way or something like that. And, without a notice that that's happening, all of that can happen while, the abutter is at work. And they wouldn't even know about it until they get home.
So in some ways it is designed to increase the number of appeals.
Well, for good reason. People
I'm not.
Yeah, people would have a reason to be aggrieved.
Gotcha. Councilor Wright?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I was a couple minutes late. Are we asking for?
We've been joined by Councilor Wright, who's a member of the committee. Okay.
Are we asking what things we want to go back and talk about more, or?
We are. We're picking up where we left off, which was the bottom of page 10 of 22 of going through the ordinance. We didn't, as a committee, reach a decision on the notification provision. So we're revisiting that before we move on because we have more members of the committee here now.
Okay, and then the other thing is, which was kind of not our usual, is about what size to protect trees. And we had a 3-way vote instead of voting each one up or down, which I think would be a better way to do it. I don't know if you're going to go back to that or not.
Yeah, let's just try and work on the decision we're on now. Then we'll
Okay.
revisit anything needs to be revisited.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Councilor Greenberg?
Thank you. So are these notifications going to be sent out for any tree on the lot that will be taken down, or just trees that border the property line?
My understanding is this is for any tree.
Okay. And how does
If
the,
I'm wrong about that, someone jump in and tell me, but this is for any permit application.
and then how does the appeal process work? Does Mr. Welsh make the final decision if there is an appeal?
That's a
No.
separate topic for discussion.
Yep, it's not me.
Oh, it's not you.
Under the current ordinance, it's the mayor.
Okay. And then if Mr. Welsh sends out notifications, I remember at our last meeting, he mentioned that it would be a lot of paperwork. And I would rather have Mr. Welsh out there planting and inspecting trees rather than stuffing envelopes. So I'm concerned about that. Thank you.
President Albright?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I actually like the idea that Councilor, blanking on everybody's name at the moment, Councilor Grossman just said about only notification trees on the line. But I was listening as Councilor Maliki described the reason, and it sounded to me like only the immediate abutters applied to most of the things that Councilor Maliki listed. The tree canopy, 500 feet is very, very far. So I would not be in favor of that. And I like the idea that Councilor Greenberg just raised about only notification for trees along the property line. So that's a new wrinkle.
Great.
Just remember that some
Councilor
very
Maliki,
large.
let me keep working through members of the committee and questions, okay? Councilor Humphrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of thoughts in response to what's come up so far. So first point, grievances and appeals are both discussed on a later page, and I think it's important to separate that question from notifications because either there is or isn't a grievance case, and maybe those parameters need to be reviewed and refined, but that doesn't really have to do with the notification. And second, one of the other benefits of having a notification system, even if it's a fairly limited one, is that if a neighbor does not receive any notification and they see a tree crew show up next door, that might spur them to call Mr. Welch and find out if there is an illegal or unauthorized removal happening, which we know sometimes happens already. So again, probably doesn't need to be 500 feet, in my opinion. I think that's going to create a paperwork burden as we've been discussing. But in terms of immediate abutters, I think that's more practical and useful.
Mr. Yo?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to quickly remind folks that the tree warden's decision isn't really about whether trees get cut down or not. It's really a math equation here. It's replacement inches either on site or payment into the tree fund. This isn't necessarily about whether or not the trees get cut down. It's a financial decision here that and this gets to the appeal issue too, involving city councilors in a math equation. This is an administrative matter, really. And, you know, I think just want to remind people that this isn't a policy thing. And, you know, going 500 feet, as I've mentioned before, is going to cause all sorts of problems. If you're going to do notification, do it to the abutters. It's an interesting concept of just for the trees along the edge. I'm not sure how practical that really is or not. But I just wanted to remind people, this is really the tree warden's decision under the ordinance is actually limited here. It's not whether the trees get cut down or not. It's really a math equation here. And so
well, the very next thing we're going to get into is the standards for grant or denial.
Yeah. So just want to mention that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Norton. I notice we've been joined by Councilor Baker. I believe we now have a full complement of the committee. Go ahead, Councilor Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So regarding the issue of notification, we notify people of all kinds of things, and we don't take into account, at least I haven't heard us weigh how many people are going to have to be stuffing envelopes and who will have to be stuffing envelopes. We have a principle of notification of things that are going to affect you. So a change in the rules of the parking on your street, a tear down. I live in a historic district, so I'm alerted when someone's going to change their shutters. So I would like us to think about whether we support the principle of notification of things that will affect you. And then I'm sure that we can figure out a process that'll make sense from there. And then in terms of the boundary for the notification, I would hope that we would encourage us to just focus on the science of who is affected in terms of the air quality, the increase in heat. Literally, trees taken down near you are going to make you need to use air conditioning more. Flooding. So whether it's direct abutters, whether it's 500 feet, I would hope that we would lead with the science. Thanks.
Councilor Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I tend to go with, I want notification, but with abutters, but then I have another problem with that, is that in my ward, especially precinct 4, which is Oak Hill Park, we have pathways. And to me, an abutter would be somebody on the other side of the pathway. We're talking about a pathway that is, you know, cars don't go down, for those of you who still haven't made it over to that side of the city. You know, because we just had a situation down there, which Mr. Welch knows about. I mean, it was a really large growth city tree. It was leaning, but it wasn't, it was healthy. It was very healthy. And the developer had cut the roots on this side, but whether that's got nothing to do with what we're talking about or not, but I would want the people on the other side of that pathway to be notified on if we're talking about abutters. So that would have to be tweaked for me. And the last thing I want to see is large growth trees, 100, 150-year-old trees just cut down nilly-willy. Thanks.
Councilor Baker, you haven't spoken yet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry to be late, but I gather you started by asking the question of notification. Is that the first issue on the?
Correct. We went back to where we left off, which was page 10 of 20 of the document that lays out the two different proposals, and the issue which we as a committee did not resolve, which was for all tree permit applications, should the city send out notification? The council proposal is to send out notification to every abutter and neighbor within 500 feet of the property where the tree permit application has been filed. And the city's proposal is to make no change in the current ordinance.
Okay, so part of this is, I think, one of the reasons I want to raise a question that I raised last time, that some of these things all sort of interlock to some degree. If you're talking about preserving these very important trees, I think notice is appropriate. Mr. Yo says this is just a financial decision. At least my impression that part of the rationale for the proposal being made is to provide a mechanism to preserve trees from being lost that may be worth saving. Just city trees, for example, can't be cut down unless the mayor, if there's someone who objects, unless the mayor says, yes, there's a standard for preservation of those trees, as I recall it. So one of the reasons I wanted to ask the question about where we were is whether we'll have a chance to sort of think about this in a systemic way, as well as just the individual components that we're talking about. And on the assumption that there is some interest in an abutter about what happens, that's not just the amount that's paid, but whether in fact something is going to go on, as well as a public interest, as some of our colleagues have indicated. I think some degree of notification is appropriate. What that is and how you calculate it, I'm not sure yet. But I think it's premised not just on whether someone is paying the right amount, but whether in fact this is an appropriate act to take. And if we're not talking about that, if that's not on the table, I think that's really important to clarify for everybody concerned, because it changes the calculus of what we're doing. It seems to me, from a policy one about preservation, to which I think most of the public think this is about, to one which is really how much do you pay for the privilege and under what conditions.
The next issue that we're going to discuss is the standards for grant or denial of the application. So right now we're just talking about notification of the application to abutters of the property. Right.
So, but am I correct? I mean, Mr. Yo is a credible witness, but is this, aren't we talking still about whether some trees come down or not? What do you, I don't understand the question. No, the question is, if someone needs a permit and they pay the right amount, is that the end of the game? In other words, there are two different things that could occur. One is you say, well, you can't cut a tree down without a permit, and replacing it in kind, in effect, with cash. And we want to make sure that the amount is sufficient, that the public interest is protected in some way, because people have to make a financial calculus. If the way the ordinance is going to end up, it says, well, there's some trees where you have to show good cause to cut it down under certain conditions because they are really an extraordinary effect. Not landmark is the wrong word because it implies a structure, but it's certainly, we've talked about the important trees. Then there's a different question, it seems to me. So I think that's why I'm saying these are interrelated. But on the, so if we can clarify that at some point, I think it would be helpful. Okay, that point will be coming up. Councilor Leary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to weigh in on the notification. I do favor it for abutters. I agree with Councilor Greenberg's concern about an administrative burden for Mr. Welch regarding notifications at 500 feet. However, if we were going to use resources to hire additional administrative staff so that would be able to be done by not Mr. Welch himself, I would be more open to, going a little bit broader. But I do support notification for direct abutters. I wanted to ask about, do we have a list of trees that are, say that, like we do with, for example, for the streets that are scheduled to be repaved? Could we have a list of streets where there is a request for removal that would be publicly listed on our website that people could look to for information? I think that might be helpful in some way so that people can see who are particularly concerned about tree loss can see where this is happening and keep up with it. And I would say that, I don't quite agree that this is just a math equation. It's a very personal thing when a tree right next to you is cut down and removed. It's invasive. It's really breaks my heart when I see a tree come down that doesn't have to. So I really agree with all the importance of protecting our trees to the best possible way we can without being completely intrusive or having a financial burden on people who need to do some property improvements. So that's where I stand on notification. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Markowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have 2 quick points on the notification. I'll just say, having sat on several hundred land use hearings and seeing people who show up with the 300 feet rule we have there, maybe it's because they're not contentious, but we don't see that many people. And I also think that within 300 feet, a lot of parcels in the city, you don't necessarily have a residential abutter. You've got some kind of other abutter, including open space. I think it's worth very seriously considering whether or not that limitation could be extended. And as far as the procedural thing, again, I'm sensitive to that, but this city in general, and Mr. Yo, I think you and I have talked about this, there's a lot of process work that could be done to improve our efficiency. And we can use software to identify people and take the, a lot of the, hand intensive work and actually automate it somehow. So I don't necessarily accept the administrative burden as a problem that is sufficient enough to defeat the need for notification. I think it's a challenge and you go fix it. So I just want to offer those 2 points. Thanks, Chair.
Councilor Noel.
Thank you. So in the interest of just, kicking the tires on this as a committee, and I know that this is going to sound really wild, but I'm really struggling with this one, and I want to be convinced, but where my head is going is, when we talked about the impact your neighbor's going to have when you take down a tree, what happens next? Is my neighbor going to tell me I can't drive a gas car? Like, what about my individual rights and the rights of my neighbor? Because there's lots of things that can happen on my property that could impact a neighbor. And where does it end? And I'm not trying to be silly. I just think I don't see the difference in some ways between other choices I might make on my property. And I would be so uncomfortable if my neighbor started telling me what I could and couldn't do. And I'm open to being convinced, but I just, in my gut, and I could just not be looking at this the right way. It just feels like government overreach.
All right, going back to people who have spoken. Councilor Malachy.
Okay. Oh boy. So many points to make. Let me go backwards. First of all, to Councilor Noel's point, we do regulate a lot of things that people can or can't do on their own property. For example, we've got the light trespass ordinance, we've got the, noise ordinances. I assume we've got things about, uncovered trash and all that. And, if one of those gets violated, it's kind of a temporary condition and you can fix it. If a tree gets cut down that shouldn't have been cut down, it's permanent. It's gone for, the decades that it would have been there, and you miss it. So that's one point. Pardon me, on the question of, looking at notification for trees just along the property line, however you define that, versus the whole lot. I think it's just much simpler thing to follow to have it cover the whole lot rather than have people saying, oh, I thought this was only, 10 feet and not 12 feet or whatever. And in addition to that, you can have very significant trees that might be just over whatever distance you might want to define as, on or near the property line, that can have an even bigger impact in terms of, say, flooding by reducing the tree canopy, absorbing the water. It could have a much bigger impact than a tree that was within the distance of the property line. Let's see what, okay, to Councilor Ryan's point about abutters across the path, I would definitely want to count them as abutters, as direct abutters, as I would want to count the people across the street as direct abutters, because often they might be getting, well, obviously they're getting the benefits of air pollution reduction and heat island effect by trees that might be in the front yard across the street from them. So even though their property isn't touching the other property, they're directly affected. The other thing I really wanted to say in response to Mr. Yo's characterizing this as just a kind of numerical exercise on Mark's part, it's really more than that, because Mark's got to handle all these applications, and hopefully we're going to have better quality applications with properly marked and designated, tree species designated, and all that. But the way things are happening now, and there was a big example this summer, and I've shown the pictures in the presentations, the 56 Upland Road situation, where they basically cut down a backyard forest. When that application came in, it understated both the number of trees that they were going to remove and the total caliper inches that were going to be removed. And maybe that was going to get sorted out when Mark came back to look, or maybe the trees were just going to be gone, and the evidence was going to be gone. And it was the neighbor that said, hey, they're cutting down way more trees than that are on that application. And if nobody knows that process is going on, you don't have that sort of audit oversight function that you can get from neighbors saying that, hey, maybe they cut down some trees ahead of time and they're not telling you about those, or maybe they're telling you these trees are dead and they're not really dead. So I think it's really important to have that kind of check and balance as well. And it will help ensure that the city is not losing money by not getting the full amount that a developer or whoever is cutting down the trees owes. Thank you.
Councilor Norton.
Thank you. Few comments. In addition to the light ordinance and the noise ordinance, we passed a junk ordinance. Like we're controlling how ugly someone else's yard and beat up can be. So we definitely take steps to limit the impact of neighbors on one another. The other thing,
Councilor Norton, some would say that many of the ordinances we pass are junk, but go ahead.
Or at least some of the comments are junk. And in terms of cars, I would let my colleague from Ward 6 know that she should not get too excited about her gas car after 2035, because Governor Baker and the legislature did ban the sale of gas cars. So to the extent that there are neighbors, that step has already been taken. I wanted to also just say how much I appreciate the comment from Councillor Leary, because this really is an emotional issue for many, not only of us, but for many of the people who have reached out to us, including in the petition that we just received. So many of the comments do talk about the connection that people feel to the trees. And so, I like to talk about the science and the air quality and all that, but there really is those mental health benefits that people get from access to trees and to greenery and to nature. And then the last point I wanted to make is there actually is, the more I thought about it, an equity issue related to the notification area, in that if you are north of the Pike where the lots are a lot smaller, your abutter is going to be a lot closer than if you are on West Newton Hill or Chestnut Hill. So again, if we're going to be leading with how much people are affected, that would be another reason to look more at a geographic area, a number of feet, et cetera, rather than just the abutters. Thanks.
President Albright.
Thank you. I was thinking about what are the reasons why people might want to cut down a tree in their backyard, for example. They might want to enlarge their kitchen and the tree is in the way. They might have a small lot and they want to add a swing set and the tree is in the way of that. They might want to have a garden and there are so many shade trees, there's no sun coming into their backyard. So there's lots of reasons, valid reasons, why people might want to cut down a tree. And I'm trying to understand, part of my problem with knowing how to vote on this is that I don't know what the impact is of the notification. If I notify my butters and they object because I want to unlock my kitchen and there's a tree there and they don't want that tree cut down, then what happens? How much impact will that notification have? So I'm not sure I know how to vote on this until I hear what impact this could have on the process. Can they stop the process? Can they
It's a
stop?
good question, Mr. Yo, Mr. Welch, do you want to weigh in either, as it works today? I don't recall anything in either of the proposals, but do you want to weigh in? How does it work today? And how would it work under this proposal? What opportunity is there for a non-property owner to intervene and stop a tree removal?
So at this point, the only way, there's no way an abutting property owner can intervene with the removal of a tree, with the exception of if they're aware of the project, they can file an appeal with the mayor. That would stop the tree removal until the matter was decided upon by the mayor.
So that goes for a tree on your property or for street trees? Is that also for a tree
I'm strictly talking about trees on the property.
on the property? So what happens in those instances? Can you give us some examples?
It's very far and few between. There aren't very many. So earlier, Councilor Malicki mentioned an instance, although the mayor didn't have to rule on it. There was a property on Walnut Street behind Whole Foods. The neighbors were aware that a permit had been issued and they submitted an appeal to the mayor. In the meantime, the builder then rescinded their application knowing that had been filed. In that case, it led to a dialogue, and a couple of years later, the project finally happened. The only other the most recent instance would be with what took place with the Newton Cemetery Corporation. They filed an appeal and then the mayor made a ruling.
Mark, if people, let's just say abutters for now, like heard about the permit application, because this is earlier in the process now, right? If they heard about a permit application, they sent letters saying, oh, Mr. Tree Warden, please don't allow this to happen. We love these trees in our neighbor's yard. But your decision, and we'll get to that in a minute, Mr. Chair, is really, again, largely about how much replacement is required versus or a payment into a tree fund. So the question really, what happens if people appeal or send in comment letters before you make a decision? So I don't know, maybe explain how that might happen.
Sure. So right now, although it's not frequent, it is not unheard of for me to hear from an abutting property where they know a project is about to take place. And oftentimes I'll hear about it for months in advance before that project takes place. They heard their neighbor sold their property and they'll reach out to me. In those cases, they can express their concerns. I'm happy to listen, but in the end, I'm obligated to follow the rules within the ordinance, and the ordinance essentially, as long as the applicant meets the requirements within the tree ordinance, whether that's tree replacement or tree protection, then I must approve the tree permit. There's no judgment. I make no judgment call on whether a tree should or shouldn't be removed. As long as you meet the requirements of the tree ordinance, I'm going to issue that tree permit. Again, conceptually, at that point, someone could file an appeal with the mayor. And in most cases for us, there's very, very few appeals in the last 20 years. And with the exception of that one we talked about, that again, the builder ended up taking back the permit. All the appeals that have ever been filed have all been large projects, or Wegmans, terraces, very, very large projects.
And is that appeal essentially saying that there is a belief that you failed to apply the ordinance correctly?
No, those appeals have always been, again, with the exception of the one where it was the neighbor that appealed, it's always been the applicant, and it's always been that the applicant doesn't like the fact that I'm applying the tree ordinance to them.
No, I understand that. But if an abutter were to appeal the approval of a tree permit, am I correct in thinking that the appeal would have to be that you failed to apply it correctly because it's not a discretionary application?
So it's not clear. It's not, yeah, I know what you're saying, but it's not clear just because the current language in the ordinance says anyone aggrieved. So I guess the question is, what's the definition of being aggrieved?
So, under your version of the ordinance, Mr. Welch, it doesn't change, but I'm wondering what's the impact of notifying abutters in the council's ordinance? Does it set up a process to I don't know, change, there's a change, set up a process where they fight with each other, or what happens in your ordinance? Does any, Mr.
Well,
Chair,
I mean, one of the things is that in the council ordinance, the tree warden would have the ability to prevent work from occurring on the
Okay,
location, right?
is that right? That's, okay. That's the impact would be that the tree wardens would have the ability to turn down an application for a tree permit.
Mr. Chairman?
Councilor Baker?
Yeah, I don't think that's the case.
If I just try and clarify something, there are situations like in a historic district where you get notices in a butter or there's parking regulations, and then someone gets notice and says, I want you to take my point of view. We do that with special permits, but the decision is in the hands of the administrative agency in the case of a historic district or in the case of a city council to do that. But someone can appeal the special permit to court, for example, and the saying that's arbitrary and capricious. The question, I think, is all bound into whether, in fact, the under the proposed change, the commissioner can make a determination that the work should not go forward, the tree should not be removed, as opposed to now, where I'm hearing Mr. Welch say that there really is no discretion. If the money is paid or the amounts or trees are replanted, it's really a ministerial choice. It's not a discretionary choice. So I think part of the reason this conversation is difficult is that we're trying to understand what power at the end of the proposed ordinance the tree warden would have when an application is filed. It doesn't mean, by the way, that the neighbors have a veto, as I understand it, any more than in the case of a street tree. You can complain if there's a proposal to take down a street tree and the mayor decides, and that's the end of it, as I recall.
Well, why don't we do this? I haven't seen it, but if it's in there and I missed it, I apologize. Councilors Norton and Maliki, you added this provision in. It was your proposal. Was the proposal to give abutters who are notified of this some sort of action that they can take after being notified? Is there something in the ordinance that I haven't seen?
Yeah, we've heard anecdotally, and I want to say even from Councillor Leary at one of these meetings, that when people are aware of it, it gives them an opportunity to at least have a conversation with their neighbors. So I think that was one point. Another is so that they'll be aware and they can protect the trees on their own property and make sure that because, you know, tree cutting and other things that are done on an abutting property can affect your trees. So those are not, you know, a couple real impacts. I would also just remind us that neither ordinance would say that someone cannot cut down a tree. So just to respond to Councillor Albright, you can build your garden, you can expand your kitchen, you would just have to pay an impact fee or a mitigation fee. So none of these are saying you can't cut down a tree.
Okay.
So just to be clear,
So let me go back to President Albright, because President Albright was asking her question. So let me let her finish.
Can we come back and I want to ask mine?
Yeah, given the answer that Councilor Norton just gave me, I mean, I'm okay with notifying abutters. It shouldn't go beyond that. And I mean, people have, as long as people can still do the things they need to do to make their house work for them, then I'm fine with that.
Thank you, President Albright. Councilor Baker, you're going to finish, then I'll come to Councilor Ray.
Just to clarify, if Mr. Welch has in either ordinance under the current, we understand what it is on the current ordinance, but in the future ordinance, if suppose someone has a landmark tree, will Mr. Welch have the authority under the proposed ordinance to deny somebody from cutting that tree down? Is not, he's shaking his head. So if
No, none of the ordinances all have that. We are not, as Councilor Norton just said, there's no restriction in either ordinance that prohibits the removal of a tree.
Yeah,
No,
and
but I mean, you don't
that's
have
the guidance from our law department as well. I don't know if Jennifer wants to say anything, but you know, I
Well,
don't think
can you wait a minute? Let me finish my question, then
sorry.
jump in. I just want to be clear about what is being said, because if the thrust of either ordinance is that Mr. Welch has a judgment to make about whether there's an appropriate amount of mitigation, either in replacement trees or the amount of money, then the notification of the abutters is really, as Ms. Norton indicated, for informational purposes. It has no effect other than if someone, I guess, could complain that the amounts are not correct. That's different from what I understand in the case of a street tree, where a street tree cannot be cut down if someone objects without the mayor saying yes, right? Is that, I just want to be
Yes,
clear
that's
about
correct.
that.
That's state law. That's chapter 87.
Yeah, so that's helpful to me, because under that condition, I think it's appropriate to notify abutters. They can talk to the neighbor, but they have no ability to influence whether the tree comes down, because Mr. Welch has no ability to influence whether the tree comes down. Is that correct?
That's correct. Again, if a healthy tree is being posted, street tree is being posted, and we receive an objection, it cannot be removed under the law.
No,
unless the
no, I'm
mayor
talking
orders it
about
removed.
under the non-street tree, Mr. Welch. I'm just talking about the property. You have a lot, you've got a specimen tree on your lot, you apply for a permit, suppose you do, and it goes to the tree warden. The tree warden says, I need mitigation, but you can cut that tree down so long as you mitigate. And if the neighbors are notified, that doesn't make a difference. I mean, they're just notified and they can say, we hope you won't do it. But there's nothing that you or the tree warden will do under either ordinance that would stop a tree from being removed. Is that correct?
Correct. But if they file an appeal, if the abutting property files an appeal with the mayor, it does prohibit the removal of the tree until the mayor makes a decision one way or the other.
But the decision is only about the financing, as I hear it, right?
No, once the mayor receives an appeal for the tree ordinance, the mayor can make any decision as it relates to the tree ordinance.
Okay, I think, Mr. Chairman, at some point we should be clear on exactly where and how a decision not to allow a tree to come down is made, because it sounds like under either ordinance, the mayor may have some role, which is really as opposed to the tree warden, but let's leave that. But for the moment, assuming that we're talking about the basic model is that someone asks for a tree removal permit, Mr. Welch under the tree ordinance as the warden can decide how much the mitigation would be, and that may be appealable. But I'm troubled to think that there's somehow now a removal process that a tree removal that can be stopped by the mayor, but only the mayor. And I just need to understand how that piece is going to work, if that's going to work.
Yeah. Again, I think we're going to get into that next.
All right.
Councilor Wright?
Thank you, Chair Krinsman. The first thing about I'd like to add about notifications. So like in Nonantum, I'm just taking a look. A lot of the lots are 40 and 50 feet wide. And then you go and look at Chestnut Hill on Chestnut Hill Road, and they're 250 feet wide. Big difference of abutters in that respect. And Councilor Markowitz could correct me if I'm wrong, but with our new software in ISD and these tree notifications going to go to ISD, this should be automated. A postcard, you put in a tree application, and it should be just with some software is they can measure how far away, let's say we'd say 100 feet or 200 feet or 500 feet, and it can spit out the postcard. One side says, yep, a tree coming down at this property line, and the other side has the address. And the only work it should really be is someone just typing it into the computer system and someone taking it to get it mailed out, but the rest of it should be all automated. So I don't think there is an issue with notification, but I think just saying abutters, depending where you are in the city, there's a huge difference. If it's, a tree might be going down and it's only 50 feet from you, but you're not an abutter. It does have an effect. Thank you.
Thank you. I would love to try and get to a vote on this because we're 50 minutes into our meeting. We've answered not even one question. Councilor Greenberg?
Thank you. Could you tell me how much time, if abutters are notified from the time of notification and an appeal is put into the tree warden and is sent to the mayor, how much time is added on to a project? Say a family wants to put on the kitchen. How much more time is added on to their project if a notification is sent and an appeal is done?
So that the appeal needs to be, under the current ordinance, the appeal needs to be received within 5 days. The person doing the appeal must send it to the mayor. It's not sent to me, it's sent to the mayor within 5 days. And then the mayor, I believe, I'm looking for it now. I think it's a 30 days, maybe 30 days, but I don't know if it's 30 business days or 30 days that the mayor has to review and make a decision.
Okay, so that's a max of 35 days added on. So that decision is made.
Yeah, at least I would have to look at the details on that one. I don't recall the specifics.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so one of the proposals that we had last time, if folks have their document in front of them, the language proposed by the council says the city shall use the online permitting system to automatically generate notifications of tree permit applications to abutters and neighbors within 500 feet of the lot on which the protected tree is located. A proposal last time was to take that language, but excise out, remove out the and neighbors within 500 feet language. And our belief was that that would then require the city to notify abutters of the property. Can I see if there is support for that proposal on the committee? By a show of hands, again, we're in straw votes here.
Just
How
say
many
it
people
again.
would?
Say it
Sure.
again, please.
The city will use the online permitting system to automatically generate notifications of tree permit applications to abutters of the lot on which the protected tree is located.
That's the direct abutters? Chair?
Correct.
Okay.
So can I get a
Councilor
show of
Baker,
hands to
you're
see?
muted.
Are you replacing 305? I'm just trying to understand what the vote question is, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me.
Can you ask your question again?
Yeah, there's a policy choice about whether to have abutters notified, and then there's a secondary policy choice to what scope of notice is. And I guess I would suggest just to see if there's sentiment in the committee to notify abutters, and then see what the sentiment of the committee is for how much notice is required.
I don't think, okay. Why don't we try and answer the question before us? I don't think how much notice is a part of any of this, but
no, I'm talking about feet or abutters versus 300 feet versus 500.
Gotcha. Okay, so my proposal is to just go with direct abutters, which is, again, the councilor's language, but it removes the and neighbors within 500 feet. I haven't heard a lot of support for that from the committee. I have heard support for direct abutters. I am feeling like this is where the committee is headed. So by a show of your electronic hands, can I see how many councilors support that proposal? It's a notification of direct abutters. Or five, 6. There we go.
I
All right.
clarification here. I mean, I want to.
We actually, Councilor Wright, we have a majority here. So Councilors Humphrey, Greenberg, Baker, Krinsman, Albright, and Holly agree that we should notify direct abutters. Great job. We can move along to the next
Mr.
question.
Chairman, can I ask if you hold a minute? Because the question is, I'd like to notify direct abutters, but I might go for a larger distance than that, like 300 feet. The question is, can we at least get a sense of the committee whether there's any interest in that?
Go ahead. Yep, make your proposal. Let's take a vote.
Okay, just to say that notify abutters and property owners within 300 feet. Let's just see if there's any sentiment on that score.
Great. Anyone who supports that, please raise your hand, supporting adding 300 feet to the provisions of this.
I'm trying to raise a hand here. Okay.
2.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. That was Councilors Wright and Baker for the record. Okay, the next issue, if we go to the top of page 11, is an issue that Councilor Baker is trying to get to. I'm pleased that we are going to get to it. This is now the standards for grant or denial of a tree permit. The way this is worded, no tree permit shall be issued unless one of the following conditions exist. The benefit of this is that with the exception, I should say, of the environmental mitigation payment, the proposals are the same. So we have a requirement that the protected tree will be relocated or replaced per the tree replacement ordinance. We have documentation of the interference and damage being caused by under one of the provisions. And we also have documentation added that the tree will be provided by a certified arborist utilizing industry-approved risk tree evaluation method and any additional forms or documentation required by the tree warden. Again, those proposals are the same. I suggest we adopt those changes, which are in both proposals, unless someone has an objection. And if I don't see an objection, we can move on to the discussion about environmental mitigation payment. This discussion, this issue, will actually impact, I want to say, several sections. So what I'd like to do is have a policy discussion like Councillor Baker would like. I think it's 5 sections about the nature of the environmental mitigation payment. Councillors Malachy, Norton, if you'd like to speak to essentially what this proposal is, sort of the, you know, the overarching principle here behind this proposal, then we can sort of argue, you know, the merits and decide whether to make those changes in the 5 places throughout the ordinance or not. Or if you don't want to speak to it, we can just take an up or down vote.
I think we're waiting. Julia, do you want to cover that or you want me to?
Can you just clarify where we are? What page?
We're talking about the concept of an environmental mitigation payment. You can see it introduced at the top of page 11, but the definition is back on page 4.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have it right in front of me, so, but the idea here is that we would be providing some sort of consequence for the externality that you're imposing on other people, on the environment, on the stormwater, et cetera. This was modeled on what Cambridge did, and I could pull it up if we're doing dollars here. But as you can see, it would make it more expensive to cut down a tree, and then the larger the tree is, the more expensive it would be to take into account the greater environmental and health benefits of the more mature trees.
Councillor Malachy, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I was just going to add, so, I mean, both our proposal and the administration's proposal have sort of a more of a ramping up on an exponential way for the larger trees to reflect the environmental, you know, loss if you lose a large tree versus a small tree. But we think our proposal, just doing it on the basis of a formula, this essentially this, you know, a square of the radius instead of a linear measure, provides a more gradual transition as you go up exponentially, rather than having the categories where, you know, if you go from protected to significant, significant to landmark, landmark to legacy, and having a kind of a sudden jump there where you could run into arguments over, is this tree, you know, 39 inches or is it 40 inches? With our proposal, it's a simple formula. There's not as much at stake if you go from 39 inches to 40 inches or 54 inches to 55 inches. And so I think that would be easier, more efficient to administer, and more accurately capture the value of the trees.
Mr. Welch, do you want to say anything about, because my understanding is that this adds, and it basically says no tree is removed unless a environmental mitigation payment is made, and, you know, then one of the conditions that we've already talked about exists. So this would require payment for each and every tree removed, correct?
So as it appears, that's how it's written here, although I believe later on, the concept is if trees are planted, then that reduces the environmental mitigation fee, which is essentially what our current ordinance does, what we're proposing in the new version. We're just keeping it with the same language that it's always been. Everyone's come to know that if you don't replace inches, you make a payment, versus you make a payment unless you plant inches. It's just our language keeps it consistent with what we've had. And again, we have the different quantities of inch replacement based on the size of the tree. We use diameter of the trunk because that's what most people, even still Cambridge, uses the diameter of the trunk. You know, it's an easier measure that everyone understands. And we feel like it's just easier to speak the same language across the board.
Mark, how do the dollars, it's not clear in the package here, how do the dollars differ between what you proposed which were significant increases versus what the counselors have proposed for different size trees. Do you have that information? Because I don't see it in the package.
Yeah, so I don't have it here in this, it is not in this package here. I think it was in prior meetings.
The
I think we have-
formula for the payment is I think laid out in the definitions. I don't know if the counselors who proposed this want to speak to what that payment amounts to.
I think it would actually be helpful to share the screen with the chart that showed the different dollar amounts, which maybe Jacqueline could find.
It was in the Friday packet for November 4, revised tree valuation formulas.
Yeah, that's where you really show that literally a difference of an inch is like thousands of dollars, which I personally think is more of a burden on Mr. Welch, to have more homeowners arguing over this, the
All right, well,
diameter.
Jacqueline tries to find that chart. Let me go to Councilor Humphrey.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify if we're actually taking up the payment formula right now, which was like page 17 or something, as opposed to the earlier part. We might not be able to do the part we were talking about until we've taken that up.
Well, I think we have, I think we're discussing the whole concept. It hits
Okay.
a number of places, but I think, if we're going to have the concept of an environmental mitigation payment made for every tree, we can obviously get into what that formula is. But I think if this is the concept and the overarching principle that we want to go with, then we can dive further into the details.
Okay, so then in that case, I just want to make sure everyone on the committee knows that we're taking that up now.
Councilor Baker.
Document.
Well, I just want to.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Baker. Hold on one sec. Jacqueline, are you having trouble finding the chart?
No, I did find it. I was ready to pull it up whenever the committee is.
Okay, why don't you pull that up? Let's see if that answers the earlier question.
Can you make it any bigger, Jacqueline? That's good, thank you.
So if you look at this, you see that the city councilors, the blue, has a big formula. And it has various options for what you could put in for the base value, and those different base values spit out different costs of, let's look at the 14-inch tree. Could be $2,000, could be $3,800, could be $76. So we didn't have one specific, we're just, it was starting out with, we encourage you to do the math by way of this formula and then pick one of those numbers rather than, and Julia, help me out here if I can't do it quickly, but let's see if you go from which one, oh, look at a 24-inch tree versus a 25-inch tree. Under the administration proposal, that 1-inch difference is a $4,000 difference to the homeowner, which would make many homeowners want to argue vociferously that it's a 24-inch tree, not a 25-inch tree. That is not a problem so much with the city councilor's proposal because it's a difference of, $1,000. And there are a few examples like that. So that is a reason that you just have a smoother increase. And then, within that formula, you all could choose the lower base value. You could choose the highest one. You could choose the middle one. You could choose some other number. But so just so we're clear, there's two sort of pieces to this. That's which formula you use, to actually come up with the math, and then what number you choose.
And this would apply to every tree, not just protected trees, correct?
Well, it depends on which trees we determine are affected by this. For the councilor proposal, yes, we, as you know, we're proposing everything above 6 inches.
Right. Okay. I apologize. Councilor Baker, back to you, sir.
So just to be, I hope, clear about what is being proposed, a mitigation fund is the new piece of this, which is not in the current ordinance. As I understand it, the administration is supportive of a mitigation fee for a protected tree, whatever that, and there's a formula for getting there. Is the policy choice before the committee just whether we have a mitigation fee It doesn't apply, by the way, as I read it, if the tree's diseased or there's good cause for not, for it to come down. So people don't pay this automatically. But is the policy question, do we want a mitigation fee or not? I'm just trying to understand what we're being asked right now.
Yes, correct. We are deciding right now if we want, as a matter of policy, do we want the presumption to be that no tree permit is going to be issued unless the environmental mitigation payment is made. We will get into the fact that there are ways to reduce the mitigation payment later, or ways to potentially avoid paying it. But at the moment, my understanding, and I'm not an expert on this, is that the ordinance says that under certain circumstances, trees will have to be replaced. And as an alternative, tree removers can make a payment. This would sort of switch that and say you have to make a payment in addition to, you know, any other matters that come up later, but you have to make a payment. And as a way to reduce your payment, you could potentially replace. If I have that wrong, anyone?
No,
can
you
correct
have
me.
that right. And the idea, as Councillor Baker was saying, but we can't ban people from cutting down trees. No, this is what we would do instead. We would say you have to pay a higher cost, with the hope that that would make people really think twice, particularly with the larger trees, about doing that.
Thank you. Councilor Baker, you all set?
Yeah, I just see where the committee is. I support some mitigation fund.
Ms. Wilson,
Hey, could either Councillor Maliki or Councillor Norton explain whether a payment will need to be made if the tree is replaced, not like the DBH replacement that the administration was discussing, where more DBH would replace it to counteract the environmental costs? If that amount of DBH is replaced, would there still be some payment based on that formula?
Julia, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay, I forget the wording of the question, but essentially, so under our proposal, you would apply the same formula to the replacement trees. So, for example, I mean, most trees that get planted are probably on the order of 2 inches, but maybe 3 inches. Some developers are doing larger trees than the minimum sort of size that we typically do. So if they're planting a 4-inch tree, they could get credit for what that calculates to in the formula as a reduction to the, you know, the starting amount. And going back to Councillor Baker's point, environmental mitigation payment is what we're calling it now, but we're essentially already doing it with our replacement or dollars in lieu that we require now. And if you go back to that chart, that's the far left column is what they're required to pay now. And that's essentially what we're getting for environmental mitigation if they don't plant trees. But it's a much lower amount than either of our proposals in most cases, as you know, particularly for the larger size trees.
President, oh, sorry, Ms. Wilson, do you have the answers you were looking for?
Yes, so as I understand it then, so you could replace the trees and still have a payment?
If you're not replacing, if you're removing, 200 caliper inches worth of trees and you're only planting 50 caliper inches of trees, then you would have a payment, yeah.
If I planted 200 caliper inches, would there be no payment then?
Well, under our formula.
Or that like 2.5 number for certain trees. There was like a number where if this amount of caliper inches would be sufficient to reduce the mitigation impacts of this size tree. If you
I think you're talking about the administration's schedule, but under our schedule, you would use the formula, same formula for trees coming down. You could apply that formula to the trees that you're planting. You know, for example, there's this property on West Newton Hill where Mark thinks it's for a specific customer, but they're planning to plant like 10-inch trees. So, you know, that's going to calculate a lot better than 5 2-inch trees, planting one 10-inch tree in terms of the value of it for the environmental benefit.
My ultimate concern is with there being a payment requirement if there are already offsets environmentally to that. We need to make sure that there's no payment if the trees are being replaced efficiently, or else that becomes an unconstitutional tax.
I think Councilor Norton wants to say something.
Yeah, if I could respond to that. Cambridge has this exact requirement, so.
I'm sorry, but hang on, before you respond, I want to understand what's the constitutional concern, Ms. Wilson?
The constitutional concern is that a permitting scheme that the fee has to have some basis in sorry, it has been a while since I looked at this. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
The fee has to be related to administering the ordinance. And so under the administration's proposal, as I understand it, the cost is related to physically replacing that tree. The amount of caliber inches that they've said equal that larger tree. Under the counselor's proposed ordinance, it's not clear to me that there is a basis of how that fee actually goes into administering the ordinance. And
so in other words, if the fee is excessive or punitive in nature, that would be unconstitutional?
Exactly.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Hang on a second. Councilor Norton, let me hear what you want to say about what Cambridge did and how they avoid the constitutional issues.
Yeah, I don't think that that's what our ordinance isn't only about charging people for the cost of moving a tree. It's about replacing caliber inches on the theory that taking down a 10-inch tree, you can replace 5 2-inch trees and you're fine. We went into some detail over the last few meetings on how environmentally, scientifically, and so forth, that is actually not the case. So what we're trying to do is have the mitigation fee actually cover the cost of somehow more capture the damage. And this is how Cambridge did it.
And has Cambridge's ordinance been challenged?
It has not been challenged. And we think that Cambridge has the same kind of constitutional issue.
Gotcha.
I think that the way that the counselor's proposal is written, I think it could be okay, but it's not clear to me. With the administration's proposal, it's very clear. It's like 2.5 times the trees, because that is how much of the smaller trees need to be replaced in order to cover the environmental factors and mitigate those environmental risks. With the counselor's proposal, it's much less clear, and I think it would be much more difficult to argue that it's grounded in actually administering the ordinance. And that could be because I don't fully understand the formula. And so I'm open to hearing more about that. But I know that there's the strong evidence that if you're taking a larger tree with a certain DBH, just replacing that DBH in smaller trees doesn't have the same environmental impact. And so you need to plant more trees. And I think that that is covered by the administration's proposal, but I don't quite see the link in the counselor's proposal to make me feel comfortable enough to say that it is not excessive.
Understood. Councilor Baker.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a little puzzled by this, because I think that I'm hearing that both the administration and the proponents agree that there's a mitigation fund. Mitigation fund is not the cost of administration. There's a general doctrine that you can't charge administrative fees that are higher than the cost of administration, but that's not what this is about. This is about a mitigation of the impacts. And as I don't see the constitutional question, candidly. I'd be glad to be educated by the department, but it seems to me that what we're saying is that there's some impact beyond and above replacing the tree that ought to be recognized in the ordinance. Both ordinances take that point of view, as I understand it. It's just a question of the amount. So I don't see a constitutional defect. Now, I can understand the law department's argument that it's not clear what the amount is. We ought to be clear what the amount is and how it's calculated. But that doesn't strike me as a constitutional matter. That strikes me as just good drafting. So we want to clarify what that might be, but I don't hear any dissent from either the administration or the proponents from the principle that there should be an environmental mitigation amount. And then the only question really is the amount appropriate? But I don't see a constitutional issue. I'm glad to be educated otherwise, but I think we ought to decide if first, do we agree that an environmental mitigation, that seems like both sides do that. And then unless the committee feels otherwise, we should take that as given and only ask question of whether we prefer a larger or smaller number, depending on how people feel about the policy.
I don't think that, well, I'll hold my thoughts. President Albright.
So I'm trying to understand what's the legal difference between the mitigation fund that we already have and the environmental mitigation fund. That is not clear to me. But I was looking at the chart, and if we were, Jacqueline, could you please put the chart back again? I'm thinking about my garden, that somebody has to take down a tree to plant a garden because there's too much shade, and it's a 24 inch, either 24 or 25, either one. It's so you have to pay $6,700 under the city's new structure, or $10,000 under the city's new structure. Is that right, Mr. Welsh?
Not, well, the price concept that you have is correct, but the fact that you would have to pay for a garden is incorrect. Under our proposal, if you're removing a tree for the purpose of putting in a garden or putting in a swing set, something that's non-construction related,
yeah,
then you do not need to replace the tree under the city's proposal.
Oh, so, okay, so that is a very big difference, because I think that's a difference. Under the other proposal, no matter what the reason, you have to pay the fee. Is that correct?
Yes, the council proposal would require replacement or payment.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Okay. So, and
But Mr. Welch, you want to talk about the 3 units and so forth? I mean, it depends, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if we're going to be clearly explaining this.
Again, it starts
Sure,
with the
can we
presumption that
explain
there's a big fee. There are ways to mitigate against that, and there are ways to reduce that payment. Is that what you're alluding to? And there are exemptions. There are exceptions to that. Is that
Yeah,
what you're
I'm just
alluding
saying
to,
that
Councilor?
under the mayor's proposal, there would be some properties that would be affected by this fee,
Correct. So,
even if they wanted to build a garden.
right, but that was earlier in the discussion, earlier meetings where we discussed who it applied and what exemptions there were. So, correct. If it's a greater than 2-family property, so 3-family or above, or non-residential property, then they would have to go through the replacement process, whether that's planting or payment. Again, for us, the vast majority of applicants, the vast majority of our permits don't involve any trees, but the majority of the ones that do involve trees, almost all of them are replant on site.
so if somebody wants to build a multifamily 4-unit building, this would apply to them. Yes.
Correct. Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
so that, if somebody wants to do affordable housing, it's just making the cost higher, but that's another problem.
Well, again, and that goes to the point where I said oftentimes large projects in the past have appealed to the mayor. They can appeal to the mayor for a variety of reasons, and that's one that the mayors in the past have received appeals about.
Okay, I just wanted to talk for a minute about the base value, because it's very, very important in the city councilor's proposal. The base value of $13 versus the base value of $50 is hugely different and hugely more expensive. So I would not, if we did go for the councilor's version, I would not do anything larger than a base value of $13. But I must say, I still don't think I understand totally how the two things really impact people differently. I wish it were clearer to us all.
Councilor Humphrey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first question, this has been brought up already, but I think it really does need to be resolved. The administration formula proposal here includes pretty severe cliffs of fee escalations, and I'd really like to hear the rationale for that, because I think that is a strong argument in favor of using one of the formulas from the counselor proposal or some other formula. Again, you have to talk about the base value question, obviously, but let's look at that difference between 39 inches and 40 inches, because when we had our earlier discussions, we said that landmark would probably be the key threshold there. And again, in the administration proposal, we're seeing the fee jumping from 16,000 to 22,000 with a difference of an inch. That's a pretty severe change. And I'd just like to get some clarity on that before we get into any of the other questions around base value or anything like that.
Mr. Welch, do you want to speak to that?
Sure, yeah, so we based our value. Well, first of all, we base the calculation on what does it cost us to purchase and install a tree. That's what we based it on. Under our current proposal, under our current ordinance, it's what does it cost for us to purchase and install a tree. Under my proposal, we're also adding the first 5 years of maintenance of that tree. So what we did was we mimicked Cambridge. Cambridge has a 1 inch for 1 inch, and then they have a scenario where they did 1.5 inch is 1.5 inches of replacement for every inch that's removed. And I looked at some other communities and they're doing that as well now. I took that a step further, and we added, as trees get significantly larger, because their environmental impact value exponentially grows, we added a 2 times value and a 3 times value. So where you see the jump from 16,000 to 22,000, that's a point where we go from 1.5 inches per inch to the 2 inches, and it's just a multiplication. That's just how the math would work out. That's the simplest.
I see how you got there. I just don't think that's a logical way of doing it, and I think a lot of residents are going to be pretty upset by that if they, accidentally let a tree get larger than they were planning to.
I agree. If you look I'm actually in that same area. If you look at Cambridge, when they go from significant to exceptional, that's their terms. They go from 24,000 to 38,000. So they have a pretty significant jump.
Yeah, I don't agree with the way that Cambridge did this either. So
I think what I would say is I'm certainly open to some scenario. It would simplify things if we had one gradual piece and we got rid of the terminology of the different trees. I was just mimicking another community that people had pointed to as being something I wanted to model after. But I do think the base value, I definitely prefer the diameter inch than a area, just because that's, again, the majority of what we use in the industry. It's also what Cambridge is using. They're using diameter inch, not a trunk area. But I mean, I would certainly be willing to entertain a gradual approach. But the base value, which we need to be able to defend it. This is where I point to the law department. We need to defend how we got to that number. So it really should be based on what is our cost to replicate a tree. What's our cost to plant the tree? Is where I feel it should be.
Okay. Mr. Yo, do you have any comment on this question?
Thank you, Counselor. Yeah, I'm agreeing with where Mark is going. I think the cliff issue, maybe we could find some way of smoothing it out a little bit more, so that you're not fighting about that final inch. That wouldn't be a fun argument to have with a homeowner, or a property owner. The plan that Mark put forward really does try to make differences in these size trees. And also he tried to incorporate the cost of maintenance over a period of time. So we really did try to keep it to the to costs associated with tree planting. But maybe Mark, there's some way of smoothing it out a little bit so you don't have such cliffs.
Well, we could create a table that's 1 inch through, call it 80 inches or something. I don't know, and put a price, gradually rise from. I'm just thinking off the cuff. I mean, I'd have to think more about it, but just something as simple as having a table for every inch size and having a price that gradually increases.
Yeah, but keep
based
it
on something.
Still keep it tied to your costs, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And if it's tied to the cost, Ms. Wilson, that's more pleasing to you, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the cost, it should be grounded in the cost that it takes to replace the actual tree. There have been issues when these types of fees are based just on a general environmental harm. So it should be tied to the administration's cost.
Okay. Councilor Humphrey, you all said you have more?
Yeah, I did have more. So to go to some of the questions that Council President Albright had just raised, looking at some of these different formulas and the dollar amounts that come out there, the $13 base value in the councilor proposal does come out to relatively similar, but actually a bit under the current administration proposal. I think, though, that there might be some other questions to consider here. And I guess I don't know the legalities of some of it, but I think some of us had been wondering, and maybe this came up in meetings or maybe it just came up in other outside discussions about whether there should be some sort of a waiver or reduction condition in certain cases. Maybe that would be a means tested financial issue. Maybe it would be some other criteria. I think along a similar vein, you get into the question of developer versus non-developer owners, because, a $100,000 fee is very different depending on who owns the property and what they're doing, right? If they're getting several $100,000 or $500,000 of value out of a new build because of cutting down all of the trees, that's a completely different scenario than someone that's just a private homeowner making a change on their lot and it's not for resale purposes and that kind of thing. I mean, I understand it's always hard to evaluate those questions because sometimes people's situations change, but I don't know, that's something I'm wondering if we're able to do that within the scope of the law. I don't know, in terms of having certain conditions. I know we want to have as consistent a formula as we can, but is there any option available to us to have different scenarios for applying the formula? And that could be, for example, that the first 10,000 of it or whatever gets waived under certain conditions, something like that. So I don't know who would be answering that question exactly. It might be Miss Wilson. Just because legally I don't know what we're allowed to do in terms of consistently or inconsistently applying the formula.
In terms of just having a waiver for certain residents?
Well, because we talked about certain scenarios, but not necessarily certain owners or the financial setup, right? Because some of the property owners are going to be developer owners, and that's a major concern in the city, whereas some would just be homeowners.
I haven't had a chance to look at the legal aspect of that question. I can definitely take a look at that, though.
Okay. Just because, you could have, you could have a formula that has $100,000 for some people in some situations, and then exemptions where maybe 75% of that gets waived if they're not doing it for that purpose. But I don't know how you would structure that. But I'm curious to hear from my colleagues on the committee as well as to whether or not, if we are allowed to do that, if that's something that we're interested in, just because, again, I think there is a pretty significant difference. And the fee is not going to be a deterrent to certain people if it's very low. but you don't want to have it so high for everyone that it's completely outrageous. And that's my questions for right now.
Councillor Maliki?
Yeah, okay. So the idea that we can only charge based on the cost to plant the replacement trees, you have to look at beyond that though, because what I guess the question is, what does it mean to replace a tree? And I think we all agree that, you know, replacing a 10-inch tree with 5 2-inch trees doesn't really replace a 10-inch tree, or replacing a 40-inch tree with 22-inch trees doesn't really replace the tree to an even greater, you know, shortfall. So it's more than just the cost to plant the same number of diameter inches. We're looking at what is the cost to actually replace what we're losing. And that's what we're trying to capture. And I mean, you can see in the chart that, you know, the 3 numbers we picked, we were just trying to give some examples, and the middle one being where we're kind of same order of magnitude in some categories as the administration at certain diameter inches. So, and if you look at the chart on the far right, that just includes 3 of the kind of commonly measured aspects of tree benefits: the carbon reduction, the stormwater capture, and the energy savings, to just give an order of magnitude and show the escalation that you get with larger diameter trees. So I think that's our argument for you know, both the smooth escalation and something that is capturing what we're actually losing when we lose the larger trees. Because if you know, to Councillor Albright's suggestion about using base value of 13, that would actually put our environmental mitigation payments lower than the administration's proposal in the larger sizes.
Norton?
Oh, sorry, did you call on me?
Yeah, I think Councillor Maliki was done. So
Okay,
you were
sorry.
next.
Yeah, you glitched out for a minute. I just wanted to make the quick point that Councillor Maliki and I did not make up this formula. This is, if you Google tree values, you'll find that this is a relatively common way of evaluating and assessing the value of trees and the benefits that they provide, this cross-sectional area method. And you can get really fancy and have different angles based on what the species of the tree is and what kind of habitat and whether it's fruits and so forth. So we could really get detailed and complicated if we wanted, but I just wanted to make the point that we did not make this up. This is another accepted standard method of coming up with a tree value.
President Albright?
Could I respond really quickly?
Who was that?
I did.
Who's that?
That's our attorney,
Yeah.
I think.
Ms. Wilson, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to make it clear that the formula itself is not what the law department is concerned with. It's just it's the difficulty in seeing the relationship. And so I think what would help is to know at what point that payment would be 0 if replacement is made. Because if we'll take the 1.5, 2.5 that's from the administration's proposal just for ease of use. But so if you say that 1.5 times the 30-inch tree is reducing all of those environmental harms, and that's the equivalent of Councillor Maliki, like what you said before, is as just what we're losing broadly. And then if I plant 1.5 times that tree, does that amount equal 0? At what point is there no payment because I've replaced the trees sufficiently to reduce that environmental harm of what we've lost by taking that large tree down? Does that make sense?
Okay, am I still? Okay.
I can hear you.
Uh, okay, so using the, when you say at what point would it be zero? It would, okay, so to take a simple example, so say in the administration's proposal, if you removed a 24-inch tree, the factor is 1, and so under their proposal, if you planted 24 diameter inches in, I guess, any way, I think Mark usually requires at least a minimum caliper of 2 inches. So say they planted 12 2-inch trees to replace that 24-inch tree, then their replacement, then their payment owed would be 0. Okay. In our example, so say let's still take a 24-inch tree and say, we use the middle base value of 25. We'd be looking for a value of 11,304 in the form of replacement trees in order to get the payment to 0. So if they, I'd have to do some calculations, but say they planted 12 2-inch trees again. So you could take the 2-inch in our formula up there, the top line, so that there's a very small benefit to a 2-inch tree or valuation of a 2-inch tree. So that would not come up to 11,304. But if they planted larger size trees, they could plant fewer of them and come up to a higher value.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Okay, thank you for explaining that.
Okay, thanks.
President Albright?
So just to follow up on that conversation, if so, does the size of the tree that you're planting come into this equation somehow? How does that come into the equation? So if you're planting a 2-inch tree versus a 10-inch tree, how does that come into the equation?
So put into our formula, or you'd be getting a greater kind of credit, exponentially larger credit for planting larger replacement trees.
So it's the base value. Okay, base value is the $13. The cross-sectional, it's the cross-section of the existing trees, right? The ones you're taking down.
Yeah, and it's just geometry. Diameter equals 2 times the radius r, and cross-sectional area is 2 pi r, pi being 3.14159.
Yeah, but where in the formula does it take into account the size of the replacement trees?
The mitigation payment?
Yeah, where does that take into account the size of the replacement tree?
In the formula. You just take the
I think this is the calculation of what the payment would be there. I think there's a section that talks about ways to mitigate against the environmental payment.
Okay, I guess I have to reread that section, but I wanted to, a lot of us are thinking about, a developer who comes in and, clear cuts a lot, one lot, large lot, small lot, or many lots to build a big project.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about the homeowner and how expensive it is, what we're adding on to the cost of our homeowners who just want to have a new kitchen or whatever it is they want to do to their house. And frankly, well, we would hope they don't cut down 25-inch trees, but if they do, it's $10,000 in one model, and well, depending on, it's between $6,000 and $24,000 in the other model. And I was, you know, thinking along the same lines that Councillor Humphrey was thinking was, could we build in mitigating factors? I mean, is it a developer clear cutting a property to build a new property, or is it someone just making a change to their house? I don't know. Maybe Ms. Wilson, maybe you could answer that question. Can we add any factors like that into it, or is that impossible?
I would want to take a look and do some research on that before I give a response.
Okay. And so the answer to the first question is, if I go back and look at the ordinance, the proposed ordinance, I will find the answers to my question.
Where is I know there's a section about replacement tree deduction. Is that, can someone point to where that is?
Let's see. Oh dear.
Section 2185, maybe?
I'm trying to find the window. Sorry. Whoa.
Mr. Chairman, just while she's hunting, can I ask a process question?
I'll have a good process question.
All right, are we going to have a sense of the committee whether a mitigation fund is appropriate? And then a secondary question of which one we want to choose, or is that, I'm just trying to figure out how we go forward from this one.
That's the way I recommend we move forward.
Okay.
Well, the mitigation fund is in both. It's just what it's just what it's called and what the formula is.
Well, there's a replacement. I don't have the right name. A tree replacement fund in the existing ordinance, and the administration proposal would modify that.
I think it's page 6 of the PDF.
The
environmental mitigation payment, that section?
No, the existing ordinance has a tree replacement fund, if I'm not mistaken, right? Correct, Mr. Welch? And that's the fund that's used for developers who, or individuals who don't replace trees. There's an opportunity to make a mitigation payment in replacement, and that's what that fund is used for. The councilors propose a separate fund, an environmental mitigation fund, which will be applicable to every tree removed, would charge based on what tree is removed. And there are then ways to mitigate against that payment that would be required for every tree removed.
Okay. Just to answer Councilor Baker's question, I don't think there's anybody that wants to get rid of some kind of payment. I think it's just a question of which way we go, do we go with Mark's proposal or the council's proposal?
Well, if everybody's agreed that there should be some payment, and the payment should be larger than the current ordinance provides, you might say, just to see how many of the committee support the lower payment. And then the question is, assuming that the higher payment can be clarified along the lines that I understood the law department would find acceptable. In other words, if there's a measure that allows it to be completely offset by a certain tree planting, right? Which is what I hear the concern. Then the question is whether the committee supports that, and then see where we are. I'm just trying to figure out where, how we make progress. That's all.
So the current ordinance requires certain trees to be replaced. And it says that if the trees can't be replaced, they can be, then the individual who's not replacing the trees can make a payment to, let me get it right, I don't have it here, but it's a payment as determined by the tree warden. And I think Mr. Welch's proposal is to update that formula under his proposal.
We're making no changes we're only making a change to the formula that would in effect increase the amount of trees replaced and the payment if a payment is made.
But that formula does not appear in the ordinance, is that correct? Or does it appear in the ordinance?
The formula isn't written it's not written as a formula. It just later because we have introduced the concept of 1 inch for 1 inch and then 1 inch for an inch and inch and a half for an inch. And then that's outlined later on for a calculation of replacement requirements. But then we haven't changed the language about making a payment other than adding the 5-year maintenance. Essentially, it's the same concept. It's just doing things to increase the value of more planting or more payment.
Yeah, is it fair to say that your proposal would update the ordinance by still allowing for a mitigation payment if the trees aren't replaced, but it would update the calculation of what that payment would be in line with the methodology outlined by the counselors?
So yes, yeah.
Okay. President Albright, are you set for the moment?
Well, I hope somebody finds where in the ordinance it talks about this variation based on the size of the trees you're planting.
I think it's page 16 of 22 of the document that we're reviewing. It's
Okay.
section 2185.
So I just looked
Tree
at the
replacement.
document and specific references to the reduction from your question on the counselor proposal and those reductions, those are mentioned on page 18. If you look at about the middle of the page.
Okay, thank you. I'll have a look at that.
Councilor Baker. You're on mute, Councilor Baker.
So is the sense of the committee then, Mr. Chairman, that we want to support at least the administration? And the question, you want to get a sense of whether people want to go higher than the administration fee? Because both of them involve, as I understand it, the ability to be offset by tree plantings of sufficient scope.
There's a current ordinance which allows for individuals who would be required to replace trees to avoid replacing those trees by making a payment. There is a counselor proposal which introduces as a new concept the need to make an environmental mitigation payment for every tree. And I don't think it eliminates the requirement to also make a payment if trees aren't replaced.
So there really is an additional element. So I guess the question is, where is the committee on whether there should be an additional element? It turns into additional money. That's just a question.
I think that's right. Councilor Malachi's next, so maybe she can correct me if I got that wrong.
Yeah, it's really kind of semantics. Do you plant trees to avoid making the payment, or do you make the payment to avoid planting trees? We want to get the value, the environmental value of the tree replaced one way or another, and whether you phrase it one way versus the other way, it's kind of like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, literally.
Councilor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. So the thing, we seem to be going in circles. What I'm hearing is people want a smoother, gradual increase in fees among the trees instead of the jump that is in the city's version. So it sounds like people do want the counselor version. The question is, and this is something we can say later, what is that dollar amount? They showed us on that chart 3 different dollar amounts, but we might want to go with something even different. Maybe you want something similar to the cities, but a smoother version of it. So maybe it's $15 or $18 is your base payment. So that's what that's what I'm seeing, what we're arguing about right now. Is that correct?
I don't know that that's correct, but I think some of you may be. Councilor Noel.
Thank you. So as I understand it, the mitigation is an additional, changes the conversation significantly. The mitigation fees we're talking about are quite substantial and impactful. The existing ordinance is not as prohibitively expensive. So I think when Councilor Wright recapped, there's sort of like 3 things on the table. There's what exists, there's the counselor's proposal, and then there's the city's proposal of a mitigation fund. Is that there are 3 distinct pieces? Am I correct, Chair?
The existing ordinance has the opportunity to make a payment in lieu of tree replacement.
Correct.
The administration's proposal, sorry, Mr. Welch's proposal, would update the existing ordinance by increasing the payment in lieu of tree replacement. The ordinance by the factors in, I think it's 2185, about 1.5 times or 2 times, depending on the size of the trees. And we sort of already went through the definitions of trees.
Okay.
The
So
competing proposals from the counselors, which would add an environmental mitigation payment upfront applicable to each and every tree removed.
Great. So I see 3 options on the table.
Okay. You mean no change, update in line with Mr. Welch's proposal, update in line with the counselor's proposal, and if we update in line with the counselor's proposal, we have to choose at what level. So there's 3 proposals and 3 has a B, and a C.
Correct. That's
Okay.
my understanding.
Yep, I think that's right. Counselor Baker? You're on mute, Counselor Baker.
Yeah, I'm trying to mute.
Yep.
So when you get to the point of taking the straw vote, just clarify those options, please. Thank you.
Okay. Counselor Maliki?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, sure, the current payment in lieu structure or planting in lieu structure is a lot less burdensome. It's also not very effective at saving trees, which is kind of the whole purpose of this. And it's, I mean, you can kind of see it in all the clear cutting that's going on, and what we get for replanting. We're not replacing the canopy that we're losing. At best, we're getting, often perimeters of evergreens around the perimeter of a property, and smaller ornamental flowering pretty trees that will never replace the canopy of the oaks and the pines and the elms that we're losing. So if you want something that's going to actually preserve trees instead of just generate money, the cost has to be significant enough to have an impact and make developers think twice about, do we really need to cut all the trees on the lot to do the expanded footprint or 2 units or whatever they're doing, and make homeowners think, do we really want to put the garden there or the kitchen addition or family room addition there? Can we do it in a different way, not so far, a different location that allows us to preserve the trees?
Counselor Humphrey?
Thank you. So just going back to the earlier questions that I brought up, I really didn't hear from the other committee members about that. And I think that's sort of an important precursor question before we get into the 3 or more options for how to do a formula. Assuming that there is a legal way for us to do that, do we agree that there should be a different standard if the tree removal is associated with a significant increase in the assessment of the property, as opposed to not? And you could even debate what level that is, but I think that makes a huge difference in terms of what we're talking about before we get to deciding what formula we want to go with, right? If somebody is making a change on their property that translates to a negligible change in how much their property is worth versus a modest change versus a huge change, on the order of millions of dollars, those are completely different scenarios. And I don't think I don't want to speak for anybody, but I'm guessing we probably don't want to hit people with, $50,000, $100,000 fees if they're not really making a substantial change to the property. Maybe some counselors do, but probably most of us don't. But if we're talking about, $100,000, $165,000 fee or whatever on a multi-million-dollar project, or at least $1 million, $1.5 million project, something like that, 2 million, 3 million, depending on your ward, I guess. that's a completely different conversation. So before we get to a straw poll on those three options, I was hoping to hear from the rest of the committee on what they thought about that question. Should there be some sort of a exemption or waiver or something?
So Counselor Humphrey, I asked Attorney Wilson if she thought that was a legal way to go, and she wasn't sure.
Yeah, I know. She said that to me earlier as well. I'm not expecting her to have an answer right now. I'm asking what the rest of the committee thinks on the issue, assuming that it is possible for us to do that, because I would like us to not have to completely defer this conversation to the next meeting.
Counselor Greenberg, are you trying to weigh in on that?
Yes, I'd be interested into learning more about this, especially if it affects affordable housing and the cost of building affordable housing.
Counselor Humphrey, I'll weigh in from my perspective here, since I don't see any other hands at the moment. I'm not necessarily looking to distinguish the way I think you're distinguishing between people and the potential value that they're accruing from the tree removal or the project they're undertaking. I am comfortable with the administration, with the current ordinance, the way it's worded in the structure of the current ordinance, in that there is tree replacement required in certain circumstances. And we have spent a lot of time talking about when we think those circumstances are applicable and when into which trees we think those circumstances apply. The way the current ordinance is crafted, it says if an individual is going to remove a tree that is protected, that we have decided is protected based in part on its size, the lot, who is doing it, and the nature of the tree. If replacement is required, there is an opportunity to make a payment in lieu of that replacement. And the payment in lieu of that replacement seems outdated. I agree with those who have said that it seems outdated, but I also think that the administration, or Mr. Welch's proposal, would update that payment in lieu. And I am comfortable with that. And I think it's the smoothest way to operate this ordinance. So I will leave it at that. Councillor Malachy, who I'm sure agrees with me.
Did we lose Counselor Malachy?
Councilor, I think she just quickly said, I agree, and then put herself back on mute.
No, I said my hand was raised. I forgot to lower it from before.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Baker.
I tend to agree with you, because I think it's very hard to make a distinction on the basis of some value that is going to be achieved. You're talking about a mitigation, whether you call it the administration proposal, it's basically saying you can avoid planting trees if you put some money in. And of course, if a developer wants to do it, they're going to pay the money and go on. But I think it's difficult to make a distinction and an easy way to do that. And I appreciate Councillor Humphrey's point of view, but I think it's hard to make that distinction. So I'm one of the people I think would prefer a uniform schedule.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. And I do appreciate the Mr. Welch's offer to sort of redesign the way the fee structure works, and to make it a more gradual progression without cliffs, as we've called them. Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, as I've alluded to in the past too, I look for a distinction between a homeowner and a developer. And I look for a distinction between taking an affordable or once affordable home with a small footprint surrounded by trees, because the house has been there for a while and the lot is big and the home is small, and cutting down the trees and putting up a home that is in the millions of dollars. And I wouldn't have any problem assessing, that differently, or the trees, charging more for clear cutting the trees, because that's what I'm saying, is that the developer, I'm not talking about affordable housing and multifamily. I'm talking about taking something that was affordable and then just ruining the lot and putting up a single family home that is out of reach to most. That's it.
President Albright?
So I'm just thinking about, all the special permits that we get that are just, mudrooms, kitchens, adding a bedroom. There's a lot of them that come. Actually, there's more of those than the larger projects, I think. And so I would be in favor of raising the value that we're getting out of this tree replacement. And if I think that Mr. Welch, I feel like you've raised it too high, and you need to smooth it out, and you've offered to look at that. I can go along with that as you stated it, Mr. Chairman, but I would need to see a new schedule of costs.
Mr. Welch, I just want to, is the schedule part of the ordinance, or does the ordinance allow, as I understand it, does the current ordinance allow the tree warden to develop the schedule?
So the current ordinance doesn't have a schedule. The current ordinance says that it will be based on a per inch cost.
Right.
Because we don't have that graduated piece. And that's something that the tree warden determines based on the tree warden's costs, the city's cost to purchase and install a tree currently. So the schedule that we looked at before, the counselors had put together the nice table to compare the different pieces. They just took the my proposed changes and putting it into a table form. So no, it doesn't exist. So I think the only way to smooth it out, and again, I'm not opposed to spending some time with this and making some coming back to the group and saying, here's one new approach. We would get rid of the idea of the significant tree, the landmark tree, all of those. That would go away. We'd go back to that would have to go away, because that's how that happens.
Oh,
So
right, because the cliff, correct me if I'm wrong, to take it sort of bisect this or dissect this proposal, we have already as a committee agreed to classify trees in a few different categories, which is based on inches, and those inches end at one point and the next size tree starts at a certain inch. And the proposal is to have the formula, well, both of them basically say that when you get to a bigger tree, you then increase the factor by which you're multiplying to develop the payment. So it goes up to a 1.5 payment, it goes up to a 2. And so your, for lack of a better term, your coefficient changes between the factors.
Yeah.
And so that's going to
exactly.
create greater disparity from the points at which those tree definitions end and begin. Those distinctions, those lines are going to create the wider disparities based on the factors.
Yeah, so I think again, that would point back to, I will say, that would point back to the counselor proposal, a formula that calculates, based on some other values. But that would have to, again, we would need to eliminate those jumps, those different classifications. So I'm happy to play with it and look at some different things and bring it back to everybody and say, yeah, this is not even close to what we were thinking, or this makes sense, or something completely different. I need some more time with it, though, off the top of my head.
Without eliminating those definitions, it's not going to be completely smooth. There are still going to be some jumps.
There would either be jumps, or we'd have to, I don't know. I think there would be jumps. I think it would be problematic if we left those definitions, and then, but I'm willing to play with it and see what happens, and we can go from there.
The council's proposal, am I right, Councilor Malky? The council's proposal makes no distinction between the various kinds of trees, whether it's standard or landmarked, or it just goes up by DBH.
Right. By the formula.
Yeah. So maybe some combination.
Right. I think what you're saying is, Mr. Welch, could you base your payment in lieu on DBH?
Yeah, I think we could do something. I think I would, again, I'd
rather than
DBH
a factor of what type
area.
of tree it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me ask committee members, because now I think the president and I have weighed in on that, and I think we're sort of aligned, which is to not add an environmental mitigation payment specifically, to accept the administration proposal to update the current ordinance and update the payment in lieu but to hear from Mr. Welch about how to update that payment in lieu, that might create a smoother chart, and it might again not be based upon the different classes of trees as we've defined them. And Mr. Welch, correct me if I'm wrong, but that comes up in 2185 in the tree replacement language.
Yeah, that sounds right. But yeah, and it also goes back to our definitions. It would change our definitions that are like on page 1 or 2 or whatever.
Well, I think we want to still require the replacement tree to be based upon those definitions and to be based upon those categorizations, because I think we've heard enough evidence that the size of the tree removed. Councilor Malky, this is where I'm with you, right? That you take a bigger tree, you don't just replace a 10-inch tree with 5 2-inch trees. And I think that the genesis of this replacement tree section is the actual replacement tree, not the payment in lieu of. And if we were to approach the payment in lieu of under a pure DBH calculation, I think that might make more sense.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman.
Let me go back. Councilor Malky, your hand I think is still up as a remnant.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilor, to weigh in on this.
Okay, 2 things on this formula business. Whether it's payment, whether you start with payment and then go to inches or start with inches and then go to payment, I think it's important to increase it exponentially, effectively exponentially as you get to larger tree categories. And if pi r squared is too complicated for people to understand, you can convert that into a chart that could be published as Mark Welch suggested earlier. Just put it all into a chart, 6 through 80 or whatever, 6 through 70 would probably be enough inches, inch dollar. But you have to recognize, and Mark already has to do this every year, the fee per inch under the current system gets updated to reflect the cost, his current costs of planting replacement trees. So whatever system we use, it's going to have to be updated essentially for inflation and cost changes. The other thing I wanted to address was the comment about not making it more expensive to do affordable housing. So essentially we've got affordable housing coming from 40Bs where the ZBA can exempt any 40B developer from anything they want to, basically. So if they want to exempt the 40B from having to plant replacement trees, they can still do that. These projects are so big that, and I think in most cases, I see it now going down to my physical therapy across from the Needham Street. I'm blanking out on the name. They planted a lot of trees. They're gorgeous trees. And I think most developers of large projects want to include trees anyway. Same is true on the Dunstan East, a lot of trees planted there. Our inclusionary zoning ordinance only kicks in at, depending on whether you're talking units or dollars, 7 units or 10 units. So those are under our current ordinance and under either proposal, they're more units than would be exempt even under the administration's proposal. So they would still have to follow the ordinance, but they'd be producing market rate units. Most of the tree loss we're seeing is essentially single family tear downs, as Councillor Ryan mentioned, and single families being replaced by 2 townhouses or 4 townhouses or 5 townhouses, or basically projects that are designed specifically to be under the threshold where inclusionary zoning would kick in. So we're losing an awful lot of trees and not getting any affordable units. So we're not affecting, to my mind, what we're proposing is not going to increase the cost of producing affordable housing, because it either won't be exempt compared to what it is now, or we wouldn't be getting any affordable units anyway.
Councillor Wright.
I hate to beat this dead horse, but my understanding here is the councilor's proposal versus Mr. Welch proposal on the fees, the counselor proposal isn't adding additional fee. They're both proposing a fee, but how they calculate it is different. And it's more of a smoother proportionally with the counselors versus Mr. Welch's, which was more of a step function between trees. But I don't think it's actually adding additional fees on top of it. It's just a different way to calculate it. Isn't that correct?
Yes, and a presumption that there will be a payment rather than a replacement.
Well, they can replace it though. There's
Yep.
a way to bring it down to zero. So, and both of them. So I don't see the counselor as being additional.
Depends what the mitigation payment is set at, because I think we were getting at this. I think Ms. Wilson was getting at this earlier. We didn't see the correlation between the replacement trees and how to mitigate the payment and what would bring it down to zero.
Okay.
President Albright.
So I agree with everything that Councilor Maliki said about the affordable housing, but one thing that we don't have very much of at all is 100% affordable housing, large, whether it's, like the kind of thing that Can Do used to do, which was 100% affordable. We don't have very much that's 100% affordable. And it's those kinds of projects that worry me, that if we could clarify that if you're doing 100% affordable, there's a way to mitigate your costs or appeal your costs or something. I don't know. It's because I agree with everything Councilor Maliki said about the smaller, the inclusionary zoning piece. I would like to take care of, land costs in Newton are so high as it is. And if we add this additional cost of tree replacement for 100% affordable projects, it will and just be another obstacle.
So the one thing I will say about the current ordinance, and I think Mr. Welch mentioned this earlier, but it says that the trees are going to be replaced. And the administration proposal would update that and say that you have to replace to a greater extent the larger trees. I think both proposals would update that, and both proposals agree upon that. I like that. I think that's a good thing. The current ordinance bases the administration's payment in lieu on the cost to replace the trees. And I feel more comfortable with that, especially given what we have heard from Ms. Wilson tonight. So that's one of the reasons why I'm more comfortable with the current ordinance and the administration proposal to update that. But let's now hear why I'm wrong. Councilor Norton.
No, I'm not going to address that. I just wanted to, and I'm repeating myself also, but we've had so many meetings over so many nights, over so many months, that I just want to remind people of the photos that we showed several months ago of the disparity in different neighborhoods. So the areas of the city that are more economically diverse are much more devoid of trees. So if we're concerned about people who are lower income having better air quality, having to run their ACs less, being less at risk of flooding, then that would also be a reason to overall, what we're trying to do here, provide more incentive to hold on to trees. Thanks.
Councilor Maliki.
Sorry, real quick.
Please.
Cambridge actually exempts 100% affordable housing projects. Now, we've had very few affordable, if any, 100% affordable housing projects. I guess the most recent one I can think of is the Armory. They are voluntarily, I guess, planting trees. I've seen their plans. They seem quite interested in doing trees and landscaping, even though I don't believe they're even removing any. So I think you can certainly exempt 100% affordable housing if that's your choice. I would be hesitant to make it any more liberal than that. And also remind you that we think people who live in affordable housing deserve trees too. So that's all I wanted to say, I guess.
Mr. Welch?
Yeah, I'll just actually just follow up on what President Albright said. I just would like to point something out. So when it comes to 100% affordable, from a historically speaking, it's fine that you had mentioned Can Do. Can Do is one of those few instances where there have been a group that has made an appeal to the various mayors over the years. So they felt like the full replacement requirements was something that they couldn't handle for one or two very specific projects many years ago, going back to Mayor Cohen days. And they made an appeal under the existing ordinance where one can make an appeal because they felt they were aggrieved and they were able to address their concerns as a fully affordable housing project through the existing ordinance and the mechanisms that are already in place.
Councillor Leary?
Thank you. I just wanted to use the example of the Howard Hayward House is 100% affordable on Jackson Road. It's nearing completion. And I wanted to ask Mr. Welch if they were exempt from the tree ordinance. They did remove significant tree, including a couple of rather large trees there.
So that one's a little bit of a different scenario. The project on Housing Authority land, Housing Authority is exempt from the city's tree ordinance because it's a quasi-state organization. We cannot regulate a state organization, and housing authorities are considered state organizations. They removed trees on city land as part of their project, and they were not exempt. They were required to make a payment for the inch-for-inch replacement under the city's tree protection regulation. That's not what we're talking about here today. We're talking about the tree ordinance, two separate regulations. So they were not exempt in any way from the tree regulations on city property, but they did not have to file for a tree permit or do anything particular on their land because it is housing authority land, which we don't have jurisdiction over.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I think that's important. And there are really not very many 100% affordable projects in any case. And the housing authority was only able to afford to build that because they already own the land. So I'm not sure how much more they're going to be able to do. Thank you very much.
Okay, committee, are we ready to vote? My recommendation is to not introduce the concept of environmental mitigation payment at this time. So that's the exact question before us. And if we do introduce the concept of environmental mitigation payment, then we'll answer the subsequent questions about how much and how applicable it is. So not seeing any hands, I'm gonna propose that we do not introduce environmental mitigation payment. Can I see how many hands would support that?
I'm a little unclear.
The councillor proposal includes the introduction of an environmental mitigation payment upfront for any tree removal.
Yeah.
I am proposing that we do not introduce that new concept into the ordinance.
Okay.
That instead we stick with the current ordinance and the administration proposal, which is to allow a payment in lieu of if someone chooses not to replace a tree which would otherwise require replacement.
I would not be adverse if Mr. Welch wants to look at the formula that was used by the counselors and finds it useful, then that would be fine with me as well.
Well, what we did talk about, the current ordinance and the language that the administration does not propose to change says that the tree warden develops a schedule, which let me get the specific wording here, based on the city's cost to purchase, install, and their proposal would add and maintain the tree for 5 years. And again, going back to what Ms. Wilson said, that feels more comfortable to me than, trying to come up with the cost or the value of a tree independently. So I only see 3 hands, which I think are indicating support for this. I don't know. 4, excuse me, 4, 5, hey. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I want to clarify. I'm in support of increasing the amount. That's what you call
Understood.
it is not a matter to me.
So, but the question at the moment. So if we have Albright, Noel, Princeman, Greenberg, and Baker, we can at least move on to the next question, because what that means is we will not be introducing environmental mitigation payments. We will come to that portion of the payment in lieu of a little bit down the road, but we can at least answer this question for now in the negative, which is the question at the top of page 11. And we will not go with the councilor proposal. We will go with the city proposal, which makes no change in the ordinance. We have already said that on page 11, the next three questions are, we've answered those. We've said we would like to make those additions and changes as proposed by both proposals. We come to page 12, and although there's a lot of language here and several misspellings, there is commonality between both proposals about exterior work. The question before us is basically, should the tree, if we are okay with both proposals or the common language, the remaining question before us is, should the tree warden be required to also notify the Commissioner of Inspectional Services when the tree protective measures are in place and when exterior work may commence? Would anyone like to weigh in on that, whether we think that the notification to the Commissioner of Inspectional Services is required? And you know, maybe Councillor Norton and Councillor Malachy want to speak to why it's important to notify the Commissioner of Inspectional Services, why you included that? Because I think it ties to another section, right?
Yeah. For Mark to talk about the current process now with NewGov. So,
Mr. Yo, yeah, go ahead.
Mark.
So the way the process, currently we do notify inspectional services in the sense that whenever a builder or whenever anybody needs to get a exterior building permit, they have to have a tree permit already in hand. So prior to the NewGov system being in place, the online version that the city has, when a person went to inspectional services, they needed a copy of their tree permit with them. Today, they need to have, when they go into NewGov, they need to make sure that they file their tree permit with their NewGov application, which effectively is already notifying inspectional services. I then am one of the signatories, sign-off individuals for an exterior construction permit, regardless of whether there's trees or no trees. You can't get a demolition permit, you can't get a building permit in the city without getting a sign-off from me within the NewGov process. So we're already capturing this process.
Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought that this was related to the subsequent section in the councilor proposal, which allows the Commissioner of Inspectional Services to issue a stop work order. But maybe they're not as related as I thought, because Mr. Welch, you're telling me that they have this information, it's just not coming from you.
Yeah, the applicant is providing that information.
Gotcha.
At the time of application.
Okay, Councilor Wright.
So to me, it seems like they're saying the same thing. Why is there a vote on this? Or is it a vote just to accept it? It's basically the same thing.
No, there's one difference in the two proposals, and the difference is that in the councilor proposal, the tree warden is required to provide written documentation to the Commissioner of Inspectional Services that exterior work may begin.
Okay.
And in the Mr. Welch's proposal, that is not a responsibility of the tree warden to provide written documentation to inspectional services that the work may begin.
But wouldn't they need a signed off form from Mr. Welch in order to begin? So isn't it kind of implied already that it's both the same thing? Because they can't.
Mr. Welch, I'm happy to let you answer. I think Mr. Welch said that the applicant actually gets that information and brings it to the Commissioner of Inspectional Services.
Correct. Or at this point, it's all filed digitally. They're all submitting it through the portal online.
I don't think we need to include the language. I think Mr. Welch is saying they get the language and they're going to get it automatically. So I feel comfortable with the city proposal, but happy to hear from others. Councilor Ryan?
Yeah, I was just wanted to clarify that Mr. Welch is saying that now when all your permits are going up front first. And do you ever see them, Mr. Welch, the tree permit?
Oh, no, no, the only person who issues a tree permit is me. So in order for an applicant for a building permit to have a tree permit, they've gotten it, they've received that from me. So they have to upload that into the portal
Right,
as one of their required documents.
and you see it, then, all right,
Yeah, so it becomes a two-step process. So then, if an applicant is doing a demolition for a home, for instance, they'll get a tree permit from me. They'll go to inspectional services, do all the things they have to do there, submit all their paperwork. But before inspectional services will issue the demolition permit, I need to physically sign off on it in the new Gov system. I'm one of the people, me, fire department, engineering, conservation, whoever, has to click a checkbox that says, yes, we approve that this project can move to the next step. And that's, something that I do.
and that's what's done now.
Yep.
All right. I don't see why we need to change. Thanks.
Councilor Greenberg?
Thank you. So how does the counselor's proposal change? I'm a little confused about this.
The only difference between the city proposal and the councilor's proposal is that the councilors would add language requiring that the tree warden provide written documentation to the Commissioner of Inspectional Services that exterior work may begin.
So he already has to sign off on it anyway. Isn't that the same thing?
The tree warden signs off and provides it to the applicant electronically. The applicant has the information electronically.
Oh, so instead of coming directly from Mr. Welch, it's coming from the applicant.
Correct.
But it's the same information.
Correct.
Oh, okay. Oh, so there's not much difference. Okay, thank you.
President Albright.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think that councils were on the right track, but the city's already doing it now with the new system. So I think we don't need it.
Councilor Malachy. Councilor Malachy, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. I think it's great that we have NewGov and it's going to help things a lot. I just wanted to clarify, will, since part of the tree permit application process is going to be the plan for protecting trees that are going to be supposed to be remaining on the site and protecting abutter trees, are those plans going to be viewable by the public through NewGov, so that, for example, the abutter who's concerned about their trees not being damaged, are they going to be able to go to NewGov, see what the protection plan is, what trees are supposed to stay on the property and so forth?
Well, I'm sorry, Councilor Malachy, that's not going to be impacted by this decision right now. So let us at least keep moving forward.
Okay, all right.
With our decisions, okay?
I would like.
I understand and I appreciate that, but it's
Okay.
getting late and I really think we got to at least make the decisions that we need to make.
Okay,
So
thank you.
I'm hearing support for the city proposal in this regard. If anyone disagrees with that, let me know. Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, so there's another change at the bottom of page 12 in the chart. It's agreed upon. This works off of definitions that we've already decided to agree upon. Does anyone have any concerns about this? The change that is the same in both versions of adding the tree save area, joining lots. Okay. We now get to the other question that I was alluding to earlier, the only question on page 13, which is.
I have a question. I'm sorry, real quick.
Go ahead, Councilor.
I think it would be helpful if Ms. Norton, Jacqueline Norton, would put up what we're reading and going through for other people so that they can kind of see what we're discussing on the screen.
It's going to be a little hard because then we all get a lot smaller and folks can't see each other.
Okay.
But
okay.
Folks should have access to the agenda online and the documents attached to the agenda online. And it's right after the agenda. There's a document, a 22-page document that we are working through, and at the top of each page it says what page of 22 it is. We're now on page 13 of 22. On page 13 of 22, the question before us is whether the suspension or revocation of a tree permit allows the Commissioner of Inspectional Services to issue a stop work order. or I think withhold a certificate of occupancy.
Quick question, technically, are those two different things or?
The administration proposal would make no change in this regard. It would not add either. The counselor proposal would add both. Ms. Wilson.
For this provision, the commissioner of ISD's authority to both issue stop work orders and certificates of occupancy are controlled entirely by the state building code. So we can't direct him to do anything. He only gets authority based on the provisions of the state building code.
So I'm hearing a legal concern. Any other counselors want to weigh in on this? Any counselors on the committee, especially Councilor Baker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand the law department's sense about the commissioner's role under the state building code, but as I understand it, this is a home rule petition. And the question, not a home rule petition, this is an ordinance built under our home rule authority. And I don't see an impediment for why as a way of ensuring enforcement of a home rule ordinance, the building inspector can't legitimately decide not to issue a permit if there's a violation. If there's a, so I understand the general principle that you can't change the state building code, but I don't see why we can't empower another official of the city to withhold a permit pending an approval of another part of the city's process. If engineering didn't sign off, or fire didn't sign off, or a number of places didn't sign off, we wouldn't be troubled by the failure to issue a permit. I don't see why we can't create a regime here that does the same thing for a purpose we have in mind, that's just not part of the building code. Now, I'm glad to be educated otherwise, but that's why I'm a little puzzled.
Well,
Ms. Wilson, go ahead.
So under the building code, there's specific, I can pull up the language if you want me to, or we can discuss at a different time, but there are specific reasons why a stop work order could be issued or why a certificate of occupancy can be withheld. And this would not, or there are only certain things that would fall within those. So the commissioner could issue a stop work order or a certificate of occupancy because of some issue in here, but it has to still fall under one of those itemized reasons. And so we can't require him to do that. It can only be based on his authority under the state building code.
Well, again, with no disrespect to the department, I appreciate the building code is a different framework. I'm looking at just saying that this is an additional requirement that we're asking. If you're telling me that the building code preempts us from doing anything along this line, I can understand that rationale, but I'm not clear that that is in effect the state of the applicable law. So I'm just saying that I'm glad to be educated, but that's my concern.
Ms. Wilson, is that the legal genesis of the existing language, which I think says that the suspension or revocation of a tree permit shall not affect the validity of a building permit?
Yes, that's correct.
Councilor Maliki.
Yeah, again, we modeled this concept after what Cambridge did. They did the exact same thing. They have the inspector or the
tree warden,
the ISD directed to issue a stop work order. So this is the current practice now. So if there's a violation, Mark directs or asks ISD to issue a stop work order, and we really feel like we're just formalizing the current practice and using language that Cambridge used.
There's no concern with Mark asking ISD to do it. It's just that the regulation can't require him to do something that can't be done already under the building code.
But we're not firsthand telling Commissioner Lojek what to do. We're saying that it shall be the practice for the tree warden to direct the ISD commissioner to issue a stop work order, and then from then it's up to the ISD commissioner. But we want the position known that this is what we're aiming to do.
So in that case, would the term direct not mean require? It just means ask?
Essentially, yes.
I mean, in that case, if it's just requesting, then that would be acceptable.
The
We'd like
wording,
we would like it to sound a little firmer than a favor.
The wording doesn't go along with that. It says shall be a cause to issue a stop work order.
Yeah, that language is problematic because the causes for issuing a stop work order are delineated in the state building code.
If it said may be a cause, would that?
I think if it's a cause to issue a stop work order, he doesn't have much discretion.
Yes.
Counselor Wright.
So it's happening now for historic buildings when someone starts tearing it down or builds, too high or whatever. They're doing stop work orders now. And I would think on historic buildings, that's not necessarily something that's in, the building code. So I don't see why this is an issue.
You're saying they're doing stop work orders now based on tree permits?
Not tree, but historic, which historic I don't think is underneath the state building code, like on Greenwood type thing.
I can't speak to the genesis of those stop work orders, but the proposal before us asks whether the tree permit may be a reason for a stop work order. And I'm hearing that it may not under the state code, but maybe I'm hearing that wrong.
I think Pam is responding to Ms. Wilson, who's saying that only things under the building code can be used. But having been subject to a stop work order related to some gutters, because I'm in a historic district, there are more things than just what's in the building code. Historical provisions when you're in a historic district can also be. So the point is perhaps trees can be. So that's why it is relevant to what we are talking about right now.
Councilor Baker?
So again, I understand Ms. Wilson's point about the building code, but if the commissioner has the discretion on his own to stop work order for some matter that's not in the building code, which is the tree ordinance or the historic ordinance, that seems to me with that doesn't prevent us from directing him to do that if there is a violation. If he can do it on his own, I don't see what the difference is, but that's my problem with it.
Councilor Ryan?
I'd leave it in.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Having dealt with inspectional services a lot in my ward on tear downs and all kinds of things, there's many reasons to stop work orders, and I would just think that even without the new language, that why wouldn't not following the tree ordinance and the permits that were now will be filed together wouldn't be a reason for inspectional services to do a stop work order anyway when they violate the tree ordinance or the permit that they originally submitted with the permits to build. So, I mean, I'm just trying to see if we really need to have this put in or not, or have this debate about it or the wording of it. I'm all for making it, especially with developers on smaller lots. I'm all with making it, putting them under the microscope more, but I'm just wondering if they'd automatically stop it anyway if they went against this. Thanks.
Councilor Greenberg?
Ms. Wilson, I'm just wondering if, would it be okay to say shall be reviewed by inspection services for a possible work stop work order?
That would absolutely be okay. So there are definitely situations that it would be appropriate for ISD to issue a violation order with regard to the tree ordinance, but we can't require it. So having the tree warden request or asking them to review, that is all fine.
I'd be okay with that.
Mr. Young?
The ISD Commissioner, Zoning Code Enforcement, they work closely with staff from historic and other departments, including Mark. And they would do what needs to get done if there was a problem. So the problem here is the directing and the state law, and the ISD commissioners in this state really final say, and they created that power for a reason, and for many reasons. And I think it's just a matter of wording. Whether it's this commissioner or this commissioner, I fully expect that the tree warden plays a very important, as like the director of historic, properties is as well. So I'm not worried about stop work orders and enforcement taking place if need be. It's just a matter of the wording. Thank you.
Okay, so Councilor Greenberg, if I'm hearing your proposal correctly, and oh, sorry, Councilor Humphrey.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I thought I had my hand raised.
Yep.
Yeah, it sounds like Councilor Greenberg is getting us to some reasonable, workable language, but I had one technical question I was hoping Mark could answer, which is just at the beginning of that paragraph. It talks about a tree permit being suspended or revoked at any time for, I guess, failure to comply. But what is a scenario hypothetically where that would happen? I mean, that's what we're discussing here in the first place. I'm trying to figure out what is the situation where you would be revoking a tree permit in general.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I've never revoked one or suspended one.
Right, because
in 21 years, it's never happened.
I thought about asking this 20 minutes ago, but maybe I should have.
There are scenarios where a permit holder has done things that were contrary to what they said they would do, and then we notify them that they have violated the tree ordinance and they have violated their issued permit, and here are the steps you need to take to come back in compliance. And in the meantime, don't take any more trees down or stop doing the work you were doing, but we don't actually suspend or revoke the tree permit.
Yeah, that's my concern here. I understand the intent behind putting this provision in. I'm just not sure if in practical terms that's what would actually happen, because you wouldn't be suspending their permit. You would be, I mean, yeah, I'm not sure that the proposal makes sense. I understand what it's trying to do. I'm just trying to figure out what we're even talking about here.
So, Councilor Armby, do you have a specific proposal you want to put forward?
No, I mean, if we're going to do this, then it sounds like Councilor Greenberg's proposal is the one that makes sense. I'm just unclear on, I understand the intent of what we're attempting to accomplish here. I'm just confused as to why we're doing it this way, because what are we talking about with suspending or revoking a tree permit? That doesn't make sense to me.
So I think what Councilor Greenberg has proposed, which if adopted and passes will never be utilized, is to, I think, change the entire last sentence as it exists, okay, which starts with the suspension or revocation of a tree permit, to change that sentence to read as follows. And Ms. Wilson, please listen closely, see if you agree with this. The Commissioner of Inspectional Services may review a suspension or revocation of a tree permit for consideration of issuing a stop work order or to withhold the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. Does that sound okay to you, Ms. Wilson? Or does that sound like what you were going for, Councilor Greenberg?
Could you repeat it one more time?
Sure. The Commissioner of Inspectional Services may review a suspension or revocation of a tree permit for consideration of issuing a stop work order or to withhold the issuance of a certificate of occupancy.
Yeah, that sounds all right to me.
Councilor Greenberg, do you like your proposal?
Very much, thank you.
Councilor Humphrey, does that sound like the proposal you want?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I understand. I understand. Like like you said, it's just a question of tweaking the end of what's already there. So to that extent, it's not a new thing. It just, anyway, it's just a long discussion on something that probably doesn't make sense in practical terms. But I understand, like, this is a better way of doing it if we're going to do it. So, yeah, I hope that was a parallel sentence structure there in terms of the consideration to issue and to withhold and all that.
I hope so. We'll certainly get a draft of this before we finalize it.
All right. Thank you.
Councilor Wright.
All right, let's vote on it.
All right.
Wait, can I just ask, why do we need the part about suspension or revocation? Why can't we just get rid of those two words and go right into the issue of the rest of it?
Well, it's already what's there.
The whole section is about suspension or revocation. And so this last sentence is just saying that the Commissioner of Inspectional Services may take that information and use it to consider withholding a certificate of occupancy or issuing a stop work order.
If they're in violation, I think it should say, I mean, that's not what it says in the current ordinance, does it?
The current ordinance says that the suspension or revocation of a tree permit shall not affect the validity of a building permit.
Okay, then if it's there, fine, but it seems like if the warden has never suspended or revoked, why do we even have that language there? But never mind.
And we'll come back next term to this.
Yeah.
Great. Can we vote on it? Councilor Maliki, do you need to say something before we vote on it?
Yeah, I think you need to have the option to suspend or revoke out there, even though it's never been used. I mean, removing.
We're not talking about removing that. No one's talking about removing that.
All right. But if it's not grounds for revoking the building permit, it doesn't have a lot of teeth.
Okay, so the proposal is to add it as so that the Commissioner of Inspectional Services may use that as information to suspend or revoke. Does everyone agree with that proposal that I summarizing Councilor Greenberg's proposal as I read it? Any objections to that? Okay.
I would only, I'm not on the committee, but I would only say that it sounds a little weak.
Gotcha. Thank you. Page 14. The next proposal, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Ms. Wilson's going to weigh in on this one as well. This talks about the appeal process that we talked about. Any person aggrieved by a decision of the tree warden, and what happens with that appeal. The counselors have proposed that counselors have a say in the process, essentially. I can let them speak to their proposal if they want. But the administration's proposal, as Mark has detailed it earlier, says that the mayor gets to decide on an appeal, but the administration would add language saying that the mayor shall seek input and consult with the ward counselor in which the trees are located. Does anyone want to speak to either of these, or Councilor Humphrey?
I think I mentioned this earlier in the night, but neither of these proposals addresses the definition of aggrieved by a decision. And I think there was some concern in earlier meetings about that being potentially very broad. And I don't know if there's a legal definition out there in the wider law about what that means, but I don't think it's reasonable for just anybody to say anywhere in the city that, you know, they're aggrieved by a private removal of a specific tree. So what is that actually defined as before we get into this appeals process?
Fair question, Ms. Wilson.
In response to that specifically, there is not just a definition of aggrieved person in terms of like how far away from a tree you need to be. So that would need to be defined, or it would either need to be defined in the ordinance, or it would be up to whoever was deciding the appeal to decide if the person was also aggrieved.
But to be clear, that language exists. This is the current ordinance.
Yes.
It says that any person aggrieved by a decision of the tree warden may file an appeal with the mayor within 5 days.
Aside from that, requiring the appeal to be decided by both the executive and the legislative branches, it goes against the separation of powers doctrine, and members of the legislative branch can perform executive branch functions, and the enforcement of the ordinances is an executive branch function. So I believe that only the mayor should be deciding the appeals.
And you're saying that not necessarily because the mayor is the mayor, but because it would be an executive branch function?
Yes.
Okay, so you're okay with anyone in the executive branch handling the appeal? I mean, in this instance, it's the mayor, but you're not saying it has to be the mayor, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to be clear, sorry. Councilor Baker. You're on mute, Councilor Baker.
Trying to avoid background noise. First, on the question of aggrieved. Aggrieved is a term of art that, as I understand it, is used widely. And it's part of the ordinance now. I wouldn't try and change that, because it means that you have to have standing.
Standing.
You know, somebody, you know, that's why trees have standing. That's a famous law review article. Should trees have standing? Towards natural rights for inanimate objects anyway. But
standing is a fantastic legal concept for any of you who haven't gone to law school.
Yeah, well, it's never mind. Anyway, I would leave the language alone. So that's first point. Second point, I understand the separation of powers argument. I do think, though, that the practice of the mayor in, for example, noise waivers has been to consult with the ward councilors. And I think that codifying some consultation is certainly appropriate. It doesn't mean the decision is made, but I think it's certainly good practice and would be a wise thing to include. So some version of that I would support.
Councilor Norton.
So this week alone, we got notice that the plan for how we're going to comply with the housing choice law was submitted without us even seeing it ahead of time, much less getting a chance to weigh in. We were just informed a few hours ago about the plan to spend millions more in ARPA funds. I don't think I'm the only one who feels, and then we learned a lot about the budget last year, about the little amount of power we have over the budget. So I think that it's reasonable where we have a chance and it's appropriate to wield the power we have as elected officials. And I think that giving the ward councilor a say in the aggrievement or the appeal of a resident in the ward who's concerned about a tree, that seems like a very reasonable way of sharing power among elected officials and giving our residents more of a voice.
President Albright.
I agree with Councilor Baker, but I think, can we require consultation with the ward councilors?
The administration proposal says that the mayor shall seek input and consult with the ward councilor.
So does it say that now?
That is not currently in the ordinance. That's how the administration is proposing to update the ordinance.
Okay, so what does it say now? It shall seek input and consult with the ward counselor? How about the ward counselors, plural, in which trees are located? I mean, what's the harm in notifying all three counselors?
The counselors from the ward?
Yeah.
Because I think ward counselor is the specific term for, Councilor Humphrey, Councilor Norton.
No, right, but it should be all three counselors from the ward.
The mayor shall seek input and consult with the counselors from the ward in which the trees are located.
And shall is a requirement kind of a word, right?
Yes,
It
seek
has to
input.
have-
Now, I think we'll have to ask Ms. Wilson, but I think Ms. Wilson would be okay with this because it doesn't mandate that the mayor's decision be impacted by that the executive would still have the discretion to make the decision,
That's correct.
but the executive would be required to at least consult with the counselors from the ward. I hear what you're saying. My guess is that those of us on this committee would say, yes, the counselors from the ward in which the trees are located is an acceptable change to that language.
Could we add in a reasonable time frame? Because it can't be like on the last day when it's due. Oh, by the way, I mean, can you say in a reasonable time frame?
The ordinance requires the appeal to be filed within 5 days of the decision.
Yeah, but I think that doesn't actually always happen. That's my guess.
So they have 5 days to file the appeal, and then I think the mayor has 30 days to make a ruling. Are you
Yes.
talking about happen in a reasonable time frame? The mayor consult the city councilors, or that the appeal be filed?
So the counselor should be notified immediately of the appeal. And then consult with the counselors.
So
Don't wait
the
till
other
30
language,
day.
so that's in there. The current language says that upon receipt of such appeal, which is pretty immediate, the mayor shall provide a copy to the clerk of the city council and to each councilor for the ward in which the trees are located.
Okay, fine.
Councilor Baker?
I think, I just want to mention, I think we have precedents for these consultations already. And for instance, administrative site plan review of exempt organizations involved, at least the ward councilor. And I think the historic, maybe the landmark ordinance, we did something like this. So anyway.
So, okay, and just while I have you here, Councilor Baker, while you have the floor, you're okay with the president's suggestion to say seek input and consult with the councilors from the ward?
Yes.
Okay. I think we have a proposal from the committee. Councilor Maliki?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to point out that even though the current ordinance, I believe, also has that 30 days to for the mayor to render a decision, it took, I don't recall exactly how many months before there was a decision on the cemetery. So that really didn't seem to follow the current ordinance even, and it sort of allowed it to be, the decision to be made with kind of a lot less consciousness on the part of the public. I also would like to ask that we include the other difference in our language where it says that I lost it here. The mayor and councilors shall be guided by reasonable safety and tree well-being provisions in granting approval of the removal of healthy mature trees, so that there's some sort of environmental basis for granting the appeal, because, you know, it shouldn't, if we're vesting the authority in one person, as you seem to want to do, you know, it shouldn't be, you know, the mayor's cousin wants a break. It ought to have some basis. Thank you.
Councilor Norton?
So I'm just going back to what our attorney, what Ms. Wilson said about the executive branch and the legislative branch. Our charter allows us to block the mayor hiring of a department head within 30, if we reject such appointment within 30 days. So how is that not doing something similar to what we're talking about here? Like, I would prefer that we would have more teeth than just she has to shoot us an email.
Ms. Wilson, do you want to speak to the distinction?
I mean, that's a very specific thing that's allowed in the charter, just because it gives one very specific right in that instance doesn't mean that overall you can also just do have the power, the executive branch powers as well. So unless the charter says otherwise, the charter says that the executive branch has the power to enforce all ordinances, and the appeal power is part of that. So that would be an executive function.
but it's in our charter because we wrote it into our charter. And arguably, the hiring of a department head is a more, monumental responsibility than appealing a tree removal.
Yeah, but we don't hire, we just reject. She would have
Well,
to.
we're talking about rejecting a tree removal approval. That's what we're talking about, having the power to do.
Councilor Baker.
The law department, Ms. Wilson, going to be astonished, but I actually agree with her. And, but the problem is that the charter has an explicit exception for the rejection of department heads, but also has the statement in the charter that the executive will not interfere with the legislative and vice versa. So the separation powers doctrine is really enshrined in the charter. So in this case, I'm reluctantly have to agree with you, not to be reluctantly just because I'm being ornery, but never mind. It's 10 o'clock.
Councilor Ryan.
Yeah, I would like to, what we can incorporate into Mr. Welch's version, because we have to go with that legally, it looks like. So let's just tweak it the best we can and vote on it. Thanks.
Okay, so at the moment, there are going to be three parts to this, but the first part is purely the decision about whether the councilors get to make the appeal decision. It sounds to me like there's support for the Mr. Welch's version modified slightly to include all the councilors from the ward. The new sentence would read, the mayor shall seek input and consult with the councilors from the ward in which the trees are located. Do I have unanimous approval on that? Anyone let me know if there's an objection? Okay. Parts 2 and 3. Part 2 is the proposal from the councilors to alter the standard by which that decision is made. And as Councilor Malachy said a couple minutes ago, she wants to add a sentence that would, well, we've decided to take out the councilors. She wants to add a sentence that would say, the mayor shall be guided by reasonable safety and tree well-being provisions in granting approval of the removal of healthy, mature trees. Mr. Welch, I don't know if you can speak to the standard under which the mayor would be making a decision on an appeal at the moment. Or can you, or Mr. Yo?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I could speak to my prior experience with all the mayors that have had opportunities to review. And they absolutely, in my experience, do look at all the factors that does involve, whether it's well-being, safety. Safety actually comes up. That's always the first question. It's pretty universal. I've always been asked that. Well, the tree safe or unsafe, or will it make an unsafe situation? So it certainly is. I've always been asked that information. I've always provided answers to that information. That's the extent which I can speak to. I would say it's really individual administrations, reviewing all the factors when they look at it. And again, because there's not very many of these, and they're always been large projects, they've always been unique situations.
Councilor Humphrey?
Just rephrasing the question here, is there any objection from Mr. Welch, Mr. Yo, or Ms. Wilson to incorporating the language formally?
I don't have any objection.
I'm not seeing any objections at the moment.
Okay, everyone's shaking their heads, so.
Okay, so it sounds like, again, I have to take the councilors out of it, but the proposal is to add the sentence, the mayor shall be guided by reasonable safety and tree well-being provisions in granting approval of the removal of healthy, mature trees. Is there any objection to including that language from members of the committee? Seeing none, okay. The third and final component of this is issuance of the final decision. The mayor provides a copy to the city council. The question is, do we also require the mayor to, should the mayor also send a copy of the final decision to each abutter? If you'll recall, I believe we did add abutters into the notification about the permit application. Councilor Humphrey.
Thank you. Well, we've heard that this is traditionally a rare event. Maybe it will become more common, but it's not going to come up too often. However, from a practical standpoint, I'll just say as a ward counselor, if this type of thing isn't distributed to the people that are concerned, the abutters, then we're going to hear about it and we're going to have to ask you for it anyway, right? So might as well just save some time and let the abutters know, so that I'm not getting a question about, oh, whatever happened with that, you know? So that's my suggestion.
I think it would also be consistent with the earlier decision about requiring them to be notified once the application is filed. Councillor Ryan?
Yes, as a ward counselor, like Councillor Humphrey, I'll have to agree with him.
So
That's
do we
it.
have unanimous approval to add this language, add a notification, add a language into this that says that the mayor shall provide a copy of the final decision to each abutter? President Albright? You're on mute, President Albright.
Could an aggrieved person be an abutter? I mean, can that person appeal the decision of the tree warden? We're going to notify abutters when tree needs a permit. So now can
But this is notification of the decision of the appeal.
I know, but it's an aggrieved person who can appeal it. So if the tree warden says, yeah, fine, cut the trees, pay us this, we're done, can an abutter appeal? I was wondering that.
Oh, so not specific to this, but who is an aggrieved party?
Yes.
Councilor Baker, do you want to speak to that or something else? You're on mute.
I have to go back and check if we want to really probe this, but this is a standard term. It's somebody affected by the decision in an adverse way. So that's generally what it means. It doesn't, no, not all abutters might be affected in an adverse way. So it's
probably a fact-dependent inquiry.
Fact-dependent. So, but I don't see a difficulty with providing the notice. I think it's an appropriate thing. Certainly, the notice would go to the person who appealed, whoever that appealed.
Correct.
Right.
Right. So if all I'm saying is if the aggrieved person can be an abutter, then the person who got the tree permit ought to be notified as well.
Oh, yeah, that I would think happens automatically.
The parties in the appeal would both be notified no matter what. This is just in addition to those parties who are subjects of the appeal or participants in the appeal, should the decision also be sent to the abutters. And I think it sounds like the committee agrees that it should, especially we've decided to sort of bring abutters into this conversation already. So we would be consistent if we said yes. So are we all okay with that unanimous consent to say yes to that and move on?
Could you just read it, not tonight, but one more time, just to be sure that if the abutter appeals, is the owner of the tree notified? Just read it one more time, not tonight, later. Just make sure that it's consistent.
Okay. We're going to move a little more quickly now here, I think, because on page 15, there is only agreed upon change. They're the same in both versions. This is just updating a reference to the manual that's used, the pruning standards, I should say, that is used, and an updating of a reference to the tree warden. We all okay with both those? Great. Okay. Now let's talk on page 16 about hedges. The trees planted as hedges under the councilor proposal shall not count as replacement trees. And under the administration's proposal, trees planted as hedges shall not count as replacement trees unless otherwise permitted by the tree warden. So in both instances, there's sort of a statement or at least a presumption that the trees planted as hedges will not count as replacement trees, but the city proposal would allow the tree warden to permit that. Councilor Baker. Remnant hand?
Sorry, that's a lower hand.
Okay, Councilor Humphrey.
Thank you. Mr. Welch, could you explain a scenario where why you're putting this exemption in the proposal? Because I'm not inclined to give an exemption. I just don't think that hedges need to count as replacement trees.
So I guess so in this case, the reason we put it here is in that rare instance. So a hedge is a group of trees that are planted in a line. And if the group of trees is already a hedge, then removing them and can be replaced with another hedge. A hedge isn't a bush. A hedge is a line of trees in this case. So if you're removing a line of trees that have been there that qualify as a protected tree, there may be an instance where replacing the trees that are there with something the same species that's already there would be it's not frequent. It would be infrequent, but it is an instance. It is an actual thing.
Okay. I think the concern here probably is just the tendency to plant a whole row of arborvitae along the edge of a property and call it a day, and that we're kind of losing patience
Correct.
with
And
that.
we're saying here that unless there already was, so for instance, we had an application recently where there was a row of arborvitaes, well, really in this case, probably white cedar, that were planted as a hedge 50 years ago, and they're all 20 inches in diameter. Well, that's still a hedge. And so it could be replaced conceivably with the same type of a planting to replace what was there.
All right.
But it is far and few between.
Would you be willing to entertain a clarification there that makes it clear that the exception is hedge to hedge replacement?
Sure. Yep.
Okay. I guess we'll see if the rest of the committee agrees with me, but that's what I'd like to do here.
Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a problem with terminology of hedge too, because I don't think of hedges as trees at all. I know there's lines of trees that get to pretty big in diameter and a lot of height, but I don't know. I just don't like the word hedge, because I think of a hedge as something you put along the property line that's not going to get higher than maybe 5 or 6 feet, is a bush. To me, a hedge is a bush. So I'd like to see if that's going to be in it. I tend to go with the councilor's version right now, but if that's, I need more clarification on that. Thank you.
Mr. Welch, do you want to try and clarify any more for Councilor Ryan before I move on to other councilors?
No, I've explained how I would say, I'm from an arborist perspective, I see a hedge as, it can be a row of trees, it can be a row of bushes. They're two different, it all depends. So in this case, the only time we'd ever talk about this is if the trees meet the definition of a protected tree or bigger. So they'll be trees, no matter what, they'll be a tree. So the question is whether they're planted in a row or not planted in a row.
So
President Albright. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Councilor Ryan. I'm sorry.
Yeah, let me just, I'm just saying about the terminology. Is it so hard to say a row of trees instead of a row of hedges? I mean,
yeah, I think we could.
I'm not the only one that would, when you say hedges, thinks of these little small boundary border bushes. And I agree with what you're saying, but I just think the terminology, and I know you're the arborist, but I'm just saying for a lay person,
yeah,
let's say.
I think we could, we'd have to think about it a little bit, but so trees planted closely in a row next to one another shall not count as replacement trees, or something like that. Get rid of the word hedge.
Yeah, I mean, anything. Thanks.
President Albright.
So if in the case of the cemetery, I'm thinking, and if the neighbors want screening from the cemetery as they did and do those trees that are planted for screening from the neighbors count or as part of the DBH or not?
Yes, they counted. Yep.
So, but those are a row of trees for screening that they weren't there before and they're putting them in.
True. So that's what we just have to think, if we're not comfortable with the language, I have to think more about what that language would be. Again, for me, I understand what a hedge in this case means.
I know, but if you're adding screening and it's a row of trees, and I guess you call that a hedge, they should count towards the DBH. So, but according to this definition, it wouldn't.
according to the council
According to-
proposed version.
Well,
Well,
now,
both versions say that have the language trees planted as hedges shall not count as replacement trees.
that's
know,
exactly what I'm referring to.
That's common.
Unless
both.
otherwise permitted by the tree warden is what our language. So we would look at a situation like the cemetery situation and determine that that is an appropriate screening.
I'm
Okay.
trying to understand maybe the way the president is, and I see Councilor Maliki is up next, so this is fortuitous timing, but I'm trying to understand if we're worried about trees being replaced, why would trees that are replaced and planted in a row not count if we're worried about caliper inches? So
I
help me
will say
understand that.
real quick, we addressed the problem elsewhere earlier on, where we're just trying to codify that trees will be same or similar. And I think that's what we're saying here. Replacement trees shall be the same or similar species or such other species as determined advisable by the tree warden. Trees planted as hedges shall not count as replacement trees. So that it, unless determined by the tree warden in our proposal. So that would be where a judgment call will be made. Is it being planted as a hedge or is it being planted as just replacement trees? So that's, again, my proposal is allowing the tree warden to make a judgment call.
It's just, for me, it's weird because it says you can't do it, but I'll let you do it because it's okay. It's just weird.
We could remove the sentence altogether.
Councilor Maliki? Maybe
Thank
you can
you.
tell us why, because I think it'll be helpful if you tell us why you want the sentence.
Yeah,
Like, what's
sure.
the problem?
Okay.
You know?
First of all, we say trees planted as, let me get the language here.
Trees planted as hedges shall not count as replacement trees.
Yes, okay. So, first of all, given that Bart said these are very rare, rare that we have one hedge set of old hedge being replaced by a new hedge, not sure why they would even bother, but given that it's a rare circumstance, it seems to me that that could be covered in the appeal process, or alternatively, as Councilor Humphrey suggested, spell it out that an exception would be made for, or could be made for hedges replacing other hedges. The reason for not counting trees planted as hedges as replacement inches is that we're trying to avoid loss of tree canopy. So that's width as well as height. And with hedges, you're getting something that is essentially a fence. It's a green fence, but it's essentially a fence. It's going to be vertical, not very wide. And in almost every case, it's a monoculture. It's one species of, something, arborvitae, whatever. So it's kind of a simplistic way for usually developers to rack up inches in a probably very economical way and cramming them close together. And they're sort of doing that. They don't have to pay for a fence to make the neighbors happy. But what we're not getting is large maturing shade trees, which is what we're usually losing. So this is to ensure that planting whatever, usually evergreens, 4 feet apart, 3.5 feet apart, as is often the case, that are never going to produce a very wide canopy or be a provide a species diversity for all the other environmental benefits that we want to get out of trees for habitat, for insects and birds and all that, that they don't get to kind of use that as an easy way to avoid planting a better selection of trees.
Councilor Baker.
I'm sympathetic to what Councilor Maliki said. Although at this hour, all I can remember is what is the distinction between a hedge and a shrubbery? For those of you who remember Monty Python. So I'm wondering whether, though, that response to this is to allow Mr. Welch to try and craft something that responds to the comments of Councilor Maliki and does give an opportunity for replacement trees that do provide a screen, but somehow also serves her interests. I'm not sure that that's possible, but I'd like to see him try. And
Well,
the other
I
question,
think Mr. Welch's language does give that discretion to the tree warden that you're talking about.
The other idea is maybe I could also work on a definition for hedge that we put into the definition section.
yeah, maybe do that. And then the other question I have, Mr. Chairman, it's that in light of the time, how far are we going and how long are we going?
I know this committee likes to end by 9:30 or 10 o'clock. So we're actually honing it. We only have a couple of decisions to make in terms of the proposals. We have a bunch of other decisions, so we're not going to finish tonight. But we'll wrap up soon. Let me put it that way. So is there a proposal on this section? We have a proposal from the councilors that hedges shall not count. Proposal from the city to say that hedges don't count unless otherwise permitted by the tree warden.
I thought there was a third proposal to
not address it at all.
I'm sorry, define hedges carefully. Is that a third option?
A third option would, well, if we add either of these, then an additional question would be, do we want to further define hedges? Does anyone on the committee want to make a motion to include either of these or not include either of these?
No.
President Albright.
I would move that we allow the tree warden to permit the hedges, because I know that the neighbors in the cemetery want that screening. And I don't know if they're so if it's good trees and if they want the screening, then they should be allowed to do it.
Councilor Noel?
Just from listening to this conversation, I think we're, I go back to Councilor Baker's Monty Python joke. Like, I think we need to better define hedges, or I'm looking to legal. I mean, how can we say an arborvitae is not a tree? And if we the other thing is, if we're going to let the cemetery do it, we need to be consistent. So I guess I would vote that we further define these terms super explicitly, because I think to someone who hasn't sat through these fascinating meetings may not understand that an arborvitae is not a hedge, is not a bush, is not a boxwood. That's my thought. And I'm gonna just say it, I'm fading fast here, folks. And I don't think any good policy gets made after 10 o'clock.
So it's 10:22, so let's make some not good policy. The proposal on the floor is to include the the administration proposal, which retains or would add in the requirement that trees planted as hedges not count as replacement trees unless otherwise permitted by the tree warden, with the caveat that the next time we discuss this, perhaps Mr. Welch can come back to us with a proposal to add a definition of hedges to the definition section. Do I have that proposal right, President Albright?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have unanimous consent to include that? All in favor? Yeah. Hearing no objection?
Wait. I think I don't mean to be a jerk, but I think I'd have to feel comfortable with how the distinctions are made before I can talk about not including hedges.
So that's why we said we're including this language subject to the condition that Mr. Welch is coming back to us with a definition of hedges next time.
Okay. Again.
Okay. All right. I mean, we're all straw votes at the moment, so anything can change. We have plenty of work to do ahead of us. Let me just say, the bottom of 16, this is the agreed upon language about increasing the replacement as trees increase in size. It increases by a factor of 1.5, 2, 3. Agreed upon in both versions. I think we've all agreed upon that. The one last question I would like to answer tonight, and then we'll break, because believe it or not, like 3 of the next 4 questions have already been answered for us, is on the middle of page 17. Requirements on replacement trees. Okay, if you remember, under the ordinance, a protected tree has to be replaced. The city councilors would like to add a requirement that a replacement tree is retained for at least 10 years. And if not, there would be a payment. Now, they had said that there would be, it fell under their environmental mitigation payment. That we've removed, so that's not possible, but perhaps it would be a payment under the replacement tree ordinance that exists. The administration proposal is no replacement tree shall be removed without a permit. Straightforward. Not a 10-year requirement, just if it's ever removed, it needs a permit. And that it be considered a significant tree. So I think, as Mr. Welch has told us, every tree removal is going to require a tree permit. But what the administration's proposal would change about these is that if a tree was planted as a replacement tree, it automatically gets bumped into the category of significant tree in terms of the replacement removal provisions. It would be protected. Anyone want to weigh in on that? Councilor Noel, your hand is still up, but I don't think you're trying to.
No.
Oh, you are.
Yeah, I'm back in the game.
Let's
Here.
go. Let's rock and roll.
So I thought we didn't go with mitigation. Didn't we not go with mitigation?
We did not go with environmental mitigation payment. So that's the second half of their proposal. So as I said, we would have to rework that.
I would
But
go.
the first half
I'm
of their
leaning
proposal.
towards Mr. Welch's proposal, that a tree
Okay.
is a tree is a tree, and as soon as that tree gets planted, it's subject to the tree ordinance.
Gotcha. I don't see any other hands up. Do people agree? Go ahead, Councilor Baker.
No, I think
You're
Mr.
voting in
Welch's
support?
proposal, I agree with Mr. Welch's proposal. I think that's simpler.
Okay. Committee members, all those in favor of Mr. Welch's proposal? Councilor Wright, are you trying to say why you disagree?
Yeah, I want to just say something. So, there's no mitigation or no payment if a tree dies, but when you plant trees, it takes more work than just sitting there. And so what I'm worried about, which just happened in Ward 2, is that they replanted a whole bunch of trees that they cut down, and then most of them died. And so there should be some time limit that you need to nurture a new tree. Just because it dies, then you don't have the obligation afterwards and you lost the tree.
I hear you, but this is a little different. Right now, we're just talking about removal. We're not talking about maintenance. We're talking about whether you can remove a tree that was planted as a replacement tree. Mr. Welch, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, what I would point out here is, though, you're right, if they don't take care of the trees, then that's a problem. I don't know how we can force someone to, but my proposal says that no replacement tree shall be removed without a tree permit. That includes it if it dies. If the tree dies, they need to get a tree permit and they have to replace it in perpetuity.
May we add that to the proposal?
That's what this
already
language would
there.
do. That's what it would do.
It doesn't.
Councilor Maliki, your hand is up.
Yeah, so it's, we think it's important to have a duration that the tree must survive. And I believe we have something now that is something like 18 months, which is not really very long. 10 years ensures that they really do take care of it when they first plant it so that it will get a good start. If you don't have a significant length of time like that, they could theoretically just keep popping in a new 2-inch tree every couple of years or so when their tree that they plant and neglect dies. And that's not what we want. We want a tree that's going to survive to middle and hopefully old age.
Councilor Humphrey?
Mr. Chair, the city proposal here is clearly the stronger option. We just need to vote on it. This
All right, Councilor
deals with
Humphrey.
it in perpetuity. There's no time component because it's in perpetuity.
Okay. All those in favor of the administration proposal, give me a show by the yellow hand, because we did hear some comments against it, so I don't think it's unanimous. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's unanimous. No, it's not. Councilor Maliki's not voting. Sorry. 7, Councilor Wright is opposed, correct?
Correct. I would like to
Okay.
go with the counselor's proposal.
Okay, 7-1 for the administration in that one. Okay, bottom of 17, we've already decided against the environmental mitigation payment. So that's in there. Same thing at the bottom of page 18. I think we talked about this, not the environmental mitigation payment, but that the cost of replacement for a payment in lieu of replacement is up to the tree warden, and the tree warden's determination will be based on the city's cost to purchase and install a tree, but the administration would like to add as part of that cost, maintaining the tree for the first 5 years. And I think this goes along with what Councillor Malachy was just saying. I think we were all in support of this, but if folks want to weigh in before we just give it approval, they can. President Albright?
So I actually I'm fine with that, but I wanted to raise one more issue for the future on this page.
Okay.
So you want me to do it now?
Well, here, wait, hold off 1 second. Are we all in agreement about adopting the Mr. Welch's proposal language on this one? Any objections to that? Okay, great. President Albright, go ahead.
So in the instance that Councillor Wright spoke about in Ward 2, and in an instance that I'm dealing with in another ward project in my ward, the tree fund goes to city trees, but the harm when trees are removed goes to the abutters. And I was wondering if people would be interested in having an application process so that abutters could apply for some of the tree mitigation fund to mitigate the loss of the trees on their own property. I'd like to hear if anybody's interested in that.
Cool.
Councillor Humphrey supports that. I think it's a good idea.
I would just jump in and say we would want to discuss that with the legal department.
Yeah, I was gonna
maybe some
suggest
issues there.
that we talk to Attorney Wilson about that between the now and the next meeting.
Councillor Baker, is your hand up
Happy to talk about that.
intentionally?
No, I think you ought to talk about it too.
Okay. All right. I think we've gone as far as we're going to go tonight. We've actually made the vast majority of the decisions we need to make. We have a few left from the two proposals. We also have to discuss the exemption for the cemetery for arboretums, or however we're going to word it, and the proposal that President Albright just brought up. And we can visit that at some point in the future. Don't have it scheduled yet, but we will. The next time we are gathering is in 2 weeks for public hearing. I think folks saw the petition was filed. And so we're going to have a public hearing on that in 2 weeks, as we as a committee had discussed we would be available to do. Unless there's any other business, does anyone want to move hold on these two items?
So moved.
Councillor Humphrey has moved hold on the two items before us. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Great. 10:33. We almost got
Just
through it.
for clarity there, that hearing you mentioned was the turfs, right? The fields, right? I just want to make sure people who are listening tonight aren't thinking that's a public hearing on the tree ordinance.
Thank you, Councillor Humphrey. I appreciate that clarification. You're 100% right.
And when do you think we might get a public hearing on the tree ordinance?
What we had said was that when we are done with our work on the tree ordinance, we were going to try and have a public comment session. So we will schedule that when we get done with our work on the ordinance.
Will it be on the same day or on another meeting?
No. I want to give people plenty of notice. I want to finish our work on it, take our straw vote, no final votes, put together the language, make sure that people have time to review it, and then we'll be able to take some public comments on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it would be fair to have a public comment session the night that we finish our work.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Anyone else? Great. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Right.